I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the regular board meeting of the Kirkwood Meadows Public Utility District for Saturday, February 13th. The time is 8 a.m. And we'll start with the roll call. Peter.
You're muted, Peter.
You're muted, Peter. You gotta unmute. There you go.
Rickert,
Here.
Epstein,
Here.
Schroeder,
He's muted.
You're muted, John.
I saw his hand wave. There he is.
Perot,
Present.
and Dornbrook here.
Great, thank you. Eric, any announcements today?
Just welcome everybody to our regularly scheduled board meeting. And if anyone would like to make a comment, please use the raise your hand function. All votes will be taken by roll call.
Okay. Item 4 is corrections to the agenda or consent calendar. I believe there's one correction to the agenda.
Yeah, this is Bob. I have one correction to the agenda. I'd like to move this item 9D, snow removal driveways, off to next month. Just due to the absence of snow and everything else going on, we didn't really finish the data analysis. So it'd be more productive to wait till next month.
So is that a guarantee that we're getting more snow?
Yes.
Right now we are.
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
Yes.
Okay, so 9D is, we'll defer that. Any other corrections to the agenda or consent calendar? If not, we move to comments from the audience. Anyone in the audience would like to address?
Eric, I think you should probably entertain a motion to adopt the amended agenda.
Okay. Bob, do you make a motion to adopt the?
Yes, I move we adopt the agenda as amended,
Okay, is there a
removing
second to
item
that?
9D.
Is there a
Yeah,
second?
Dornbrook, I second that.
Okay, roll call.
Rickert,
Aye.
Epstein,
Aye.
Perot,
Aye.
Schroeder,
Aye.
Dornbrook, aye.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to comments from the audience. If anyone would like to,
Supervisor Brown has his hand raised.
Jeff, welcome.
We're putting out more vaccine for next week. We're notifying people via e-notifications off the Amador County website. And I just checked on, we've had a couple others before this and they go out real quick. You know, all the appointments are completed, but right now this morning, we still have some appointments available down at our HHS building for this next week. It'll be 2 days. So anybody 70 and above, you're perfectly welcome to get hooked up as long as you're Amador County resident and you show your age.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks, Jeff.
So you said 70, not 75.
70.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Any other hands up, Eric?
I do not. Terry's raising her hand.
Terry, welcome.
Yeah. Hi. So just an announcement regarding Alpine County. Obviously, you have to be an Alpine County resident, but you can call the warm line at 530-694-1011 to make an appointment if you are 65 years and older.
Okay, thanks, Terry. Anyone else?
Don't see anyone.
Okay. We will now move on to the adoption of the consent calendar. This would be to adopt item A, which is the current consent for claims. Item B, which is the review of receivables and shutoffs report. Item C are the appointments to committees. I think there are 3 people to the finance, 1 to the operations, and 3 to the planning, and that's described in the board packet. And item D is to adopt resolution 21-05, approving credit requests with Bank of the West and reaffirming authorized district officers and signatories on bank accounts. Is there a motion to adopt the consent calendar?
This is Bob. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bertrand.
I was going to move to adopt the consent calendar.
Thank you, Bertrand.
And
there
this
a
is
second?
Bob, I second.
Thank you, Bob. Peter, roll call.
Rickard,
Aye.
Epstein,
Aye.
Perot,
Aye.
Schroeder,
Aye.
Dornbrook, aye. It's unanimous.
Okay, and a big thank you to those who have volunteered to serve on the committees. This is really, really good. Thank you. Okay, now we have items for board action. 9A are the finances. Discussion of our financials, items 1 through 4. Kelly, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. So we'll start with the balance sheet on page 41 of your packet. Didn't have any specific notes on the balance sheet. You'll notice that operating cash is up from plan by $351,000. But unless there are any questions about the balance sheet, I'll move on to the revenue account by fund.
Okay.
You'll notice G&A, fire, and parks is at a negative, which we know will stay that way until the end of the year. Water is at a negative, employee housing is at a negative, and solid waste is at a negative. Any questions on the revenue account by fund?
Just a quick explanation, if you could. Let's just take the water account, because I know the water account is overall only slightly negative on the income statement.
Mm-hmm.
So what causes it to be this negative at this point in its?
Well, it
account?
didn't start with
see.
much in there, so that the fact that they are negative on their income statement, and we also have balance sheet items that account for some of that negative as well.
Okay. Thanks.
Well, I have a general question. So I was under the impression that we try to have each department self-funding. So that means being neutral. And so we have a number of them that are negative and in the budget. So that means we schedule that. So can you describe how this budget decision were made? I was not on the board at that time, or I was, but I was not in the finance loop, so I didn't get appraised with that. So I'd like to have a better understanding of how these decisions are made.
A lot of these funds receive property taxes, and we haven't received the property taxes yet. They get allocated at the end of the year, which writes the negative balance.
Okay, so are you saying that once the property tax will be allocated to this fund, they will be neutral?
It's designed to be neutral. Whether it will be or not is dependent on usage and revenue and costs, expected or unexpected. So no, I won't guarantee anything, but that is how it's designed.
Bertrand, you may remember that a year ago, was it a year ago or so? We went through the proper process, the 218 process, to try to do our best to bring water and wastewater to be self-supporting over a period of years, 3 or 4 years.
That's correct, yeah.
I mean, it's a little painful, but that's what we've been trying to do. We've got something ahead of us today on solid waste, which again is not any fun, but it is an attempt to make it self-supporting without the need. Well, solid waste can't get property tax, but anyway, yeah, it's a good question, but the property taxes hopefully right the ship for most of these.
Okay.
And especially this year, with not having to allocate property tax revenue to electric, because our tier ratios were suspended for calendar year 2020. So we don't have to allocate any property tax revenue in December, which we normally do for electric in December.
Thank you.
Okay, Moving on to the combined income statement on page 44 of your packet. Operating revenues for the month of December were better than planned by $24,000. Year to date, they are down from plan by $149,000. But total operating is up from plan by just about $305,000.
So Kelly, I know I asked this last month, I think, but I'm going to ask it again. So we're doing a lot better on expenses than we had projected. And I know a lot of that is simply in the cost of goods sold because we're not using as much propane, which offsets some of the revenue loss in propane or the reduction in revenue. What I'm asking about is the operations and maintenance line item. So in some departments, that's down a lot. Like I believe in water, it's down quite a lot. And I'm wondering your thoughts, or Eric, your thoughts on whether or not that's a result of, did we over budget, or are we deferring some things that are going to be need to be done? In other words, just an issue of timing, or is it simply a matter of good fortune so far this year, knock on wood, that things haven't gone wrong, that the kinds of things or the scope of things that have gone wrong in past years?
It's mostly a timing issue. The other thing I'll say with regards to water and wastewater, their amount under in terms of salaries and wages, you'll see that's all over in solid waste. Same with operations and maintenance. So since they're simply not working in water and wastewater, and they're having to spend more time in solid waste, they're unable to get to the projects that are, and they're not capital projects. They're just their O&M budgeted projects that are included in that line. So no, it's simply a timing issue at this point, and that they've been pulled in other directions. Had they not been having to increase their hours in solid waste, they would have been getting to a lot more projects in water.
Oh, okay, thanks.
And wastewater.
Yeah, thanks. That answers it. Thank you.
And that'll be global through until we get to snow melt. So record and remember my answer.
Okay. I'll ask the same question next month. Don't worry, Eric.
All right.
And we'll play the tape.
Yeah. Okay.
I like it, Bob. I like it.
Okay. Any other questions on the combined income statement? Okay. We'll move on then to water on page 49 of your packet. Operating revenues for the month of December were down from plan by $16,000. Year to date, they are down from plan by $61,000. Total operating for water, though, is up from plan by, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong.
Yeah.
I was on wastewater. Sorry about that.
Okay.
On page 48 of your packet, operating revenues for the month of December are down from plan by $8,000. Year to date, they are down from plan by just about $2,000. And total operating for water is up from plan by $56,000. Moving on now to wastewater on page 49 of your packet. Again, operating revenues were down for the month of December by just about $17,000. Year to date, they are down from plan by about $61,000. And total operating, though, for wastewater is up from plan by $127,000. Moving on to electric on page 51 of your packet. Operating revenues for the month of December were up from plan by $83,000, bringing year-to-date revenues up from plan by just about $9,000. And total operating for electric is up from plan by $125,000. Moving on to propane on page 54 of your packet. Operating revenues for the month of December were down from plan by $37,000. Year to date, they are down from plan by $106,000. But again, we see, the cost of goods there, being that we're not buying as much propane, is down from or up from plan by $80,000. We didn't spend as much as we anticipated. And so total operating for propane year to date is up from plan by $31,000.
So that's a good example of what I was discussing earlier. So in this case, we were budgeted at this stage to be 57K under, and we are better than that. But my question again was, so is that 57K something that we are planning to compensate with the tax allocation?
Yes. That's what we have to do with water unless we just raise the rates. So
this is propane. We're looking at propane here, not water.
oh, sorry. I
Yeah,
meant
last
propane.
year we didn't have to do propane, but in prior years we have. Last year propane was a positive. It was,
Generally, propane doesn't get property tax revenues, but in the case of water and wastewater, we budget for them to be negative, but it's just the way it has to be with those, unless we, obviously raise the rates, which we're,
Yeah, so that brings that actually. I don't understand why we are using tax allocation for propane. I think that
don't.
typically, no, okay.
We don't have to generally every year because propane
Okay.
has enough cash to cover itself.
Well, you are budgeting to be 57K below now. So I know you are only 25.
Right, through December. Through
yeah,
December, not
yeah.
through the end of the year.
So you are expecting to catch up that in the later part of the year?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, what happens normally is December is kind of or November or December is a low point for some of these things that require the winter season. So January, February, March, part of April, they catch up generally.
And like I said, propane generally doesn't get any property tax revenue allocated because they're cash positive and they stay cash positive.
That's what I would expect too. I agree. I was surprised we had such a low point on the budget at this stage. Yes. Okay.
I would add a couple of comments. The first is that we're just trying to break even at the end of the fiscal year and not on a monthly basis.
That's
The other
correct.
thing I'd comment on is the budget's based on an estimate of how much we'll sell and that our fixed costs are not covered by the base rate. So if we don't sell enough, that's why we fall below. So because of the actual model we're using, we'll discuss this with electricity. If we don't estimate right in terms of usage, then we'll end up with a deficit
Or a surplus.
or a surplus. And propane usually is propane usually has a happy year.
Yeah, happy
But we're
ending.
counting on it being cold.
Yeah.
Any other questions on propane? Okay, moving on then to solid waste. Operating revenues, obviously it's a set fee, so we're just at budget for operating revenues. But obviously with expenses, total operating for solid waste is down from plan by $38,000. Any other questions on income statements? Okay, we'll move on to the comparisons. I'll move down to the income statement comparison on page 57 of your packet. And again, compared to last year, obviously commercial revenue is down from plan. Residential, or not from plan, is down compared to last year, and residential revenue is obviously up compared to last year. So it's really obvious what the whole pandemic has done for this year.
Okay, I just had one other point related to this. So I just looked up the Vail lifts usage through February, for the month of February through the 12th, and they're running about 25% more power usage than last year. So maybe
Through February. Wow, that's amazing.
for the first 12 days, comparing them, it's
for the 12 days.
73,000 kilowatt hours versus 58,000. So the lifts have more people in them than last year.
but they can't pack them on, so less people per chair makes you have to spin them a little bit more.
Well, whatever it is, it's drawing more power.
You appreciate whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well, I'd like to make a comment, which is actually put some kudos here that actually we actually fare very well through that pandemic. I mean, it was a worrisome situation, and in the end, the district has been able to sustain very nicely. I think that's very encouraging.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. We'll move on now to January preliminary income statement. Operating revenues are actuals for the month of January. We were down from plan by $75,000. Year to date through January, we are down from plan by $225,000.
So notwithstanding what Bob just said, which may change my thought on this, but just looking forward to February and March, I mean, I think a lot of we got benefit from snowmaking on
In
revenue.
December.
in December,
In December,
Yeah.
right?
But
And
not in
now
January.
with that gone, I'm just wondering if with the rest, basically, I think it's with a lot of the restaurants, with all the restaurants closed.
Right.
And you can see that in the propane, you can see that in the wastewater. I'm just wondering if our revenues will continue to dip now at a faster pace than they have.
Well, we never would have accounted for snowmaking in February. We don't budget that. I think January is usually mid-January is when we've always cut it off in terms of budgetary. So we won't see a dip from any estimation of snowmaking in February, March, April.
But I think mostly the restaurants is
It's going to be,
It's the restaurants.
The restaurant drop. Yep,
yeah,
exactly.
balanced by more residential.
Yeah.
Okay.
And definitely a propane drop from the commercial
But I think, we kind of did an estimate of a 5% shortfall, and we'll be within that range.
Yeah, I think last time I looked, I think Bob, you and I looked, we were 3.2 or 3.8.
Something like, yeah.
That was, I think, maybe a month ago, but we're probably still in that same range.
It seems that for the next couple of months, we're in pretty good shape to not be worse than that.
December's the worrisome month, so we made it through that one in my mind.
Any other questions or comments on January preliminary? Okay, we'll move on to cash flow on page 59 of your packet. Through January, total operating cash was at 2.4 million, which was $236,000 better than plan. And in February, you'll notice that we are moving, or we have moved $1 million out of the operating cash and back into the LAIF so that we can get back to earning that interest. And through the end of the year, it looks like, knock on wood, we'll be just above plan by about $185,000.
Good.
Any questions on cash flow? Okay, you guys are making it easy for me today.
Numbers are good, so.
Yeah.
So we'll move on to known budget variances. Bob, you can see I added that snow removal contract revenue.
Thank you.
That's the difference between what we had budgeted and what we actually got, signed contracts for.
So just one comment on that. So it's different to what was announced at last year meeting when there was this heated discussion. So why are we down to 13K versus 14 something that we had at the time?
Oh, the 14 isn't included.
Is what?
14 is not included. These are just contracts that were not signed.
Aha.
The 14K, I don't know whether to count that as a
Okay.
shortfall or a budget.
So
It's correct. You might include the 14K also, but we didn't.
I think we said that last time, actually 2 times ago, that we would include a budgeted shortfall into the variance.
Well, that's exactly what that is. This is what the budgeted contract amount that we had compared to what we actually billed people is 13. The difference is $13,122.
Okay, let me think on that. I think I understand what you say. So yeah, so I'm still surprised that it's different, but okay, that's okay.
That was the only new thing that was added to the budget variances. All of the other totals for solid waste dumping fees and salaries and wages and snow removal salaries and wages were updated through December 31st.
Yes, I know it does make sense that indeed the 13K is the actual number, while the 14K was a budgeted number.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the Finance Committee reviewed all of these, and I think as a general statement, things that were under our control, the staff has done a great job of managing them, which is primarily expenses, deferring where it makes sense. And what's not in our control is right, the health situation and the ski situation, but that's worked out to be manageable.
Thank you, Bob. That's great. And thank you, staff. Okay, we will now move on to item 9B, which is performance reporting and aquifer levels. Welcome, Brandy.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So if we take a look, starting with electric performance reporting, we do see the reduction this month since we weren't doing snowmaking. We had a production of 968,000 kilowatt hours. 63,000 of those were produced at the powerhouse due to outages that we experienced during the month. We have a 12% unidentified loss for the month of January and a 12% for the year. If we take a look at propane.
Before we go there, Brandy, just two questions. So the powerhouse production at 238,000 kilowatts, that's, we budget for a certain amount, but that's above the budget.
It is. It's been an interesting year with the PSPS outages and then the winter storm outages.
Okay, so I used to remember, I think fuel costs us about 25 cents a kilowatt hour. With diesel at 350, I think, something like that. So that represents, that represents a budget shortfall then in terms of fuel consumption. There's nothing we can do about it, but I just want to comment on that. The other thing I want to ask you,
I want to tag in on that. So I've been attending quite a few energy committee meetings for Aqua. And they're more at the mercy because they're, IOU customers or SMUD customers, for example. But they're getting ready for their budgeting process, and they're starting to budget significantly for backup generation, which they're allowed to do now under, I think it's not AB 998. So when we go into the budgeting process, I would recommend we consider the PSPSs and what that's going to do to us in terms of our fuel consumption, so we get the budget right size. Because I don't see these going away.
Yeah.
That's a good point, Eric.
Can I do one thing here as well? As far as this diesel generation, so are we purchasing REC to compensate these emissions?
Our REC needs don't change because none of our purchases off the grid have any green attributes related to them.
No, I'm talking about.
It's based on our total kilowatt hour sales for the year.
Yes.
So the answer is yes. I think, Bertrand, we have to cover.
We have to cover. I think it's not included in our wholesale agreement. So I want to make sure that we are including this emission into our REC calculation.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
It is. It's
we
just
buy
like
RECs to match the kilowatt hours that are sold.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's how it's handled. The question I had for you and Kelly is, in our rate design, it's all based on hitting the estimated number of unit sales for each of our utilities. How difficult would it be to, on a monthly basis, to show what our budget for unit sales are compared to actuals? Because we see it on a dollar basis, but we don't see it on a unit sales basis.
Absolutely.
I'm just wondering, is that?
You asked that before, and I'm sorry I didn't get it on here. It would be easy enough to put onto this report, and I will make sure that happens for next month.
Okay, so we would do it here, not in PCS or anything.
Yes, we can do that.
And I do keep a spreadsheet for propane and electric showing what we budgeted and what we actually sold. So I do have that
Okay.
information. I do look at it.
All right, if it's not a lot of work, it'd be nice to be able to review that as
Absolutely.
well. Okay, thanks.
All right, so if we move on to propane, our numbers for propane were pretty stable for January. We brought in about 3 million cubic feet to our bulk tanks. We had a slight negative loss of -2%. We're running at -1% for the year. And I imagine that's going to continue to kind of bounce around zero like we usually see it. Any questions on propane before we move to water wastewater?
I'm glad it's not leaking.
Me too. That
No,
was-
it's creating new gas. In fact, it's the opposite.
Okay, so on to water. For January, we produced 1.76 million gallons from our wells. And we did have a larger unidentified loss of 20% for the month of January. I got some feedback from our water supervisor on that. And basically, we've done some maintenance operations work in the field, such as flushing hydrants because of the entrained air issues, and then purging well 4 and 5 due to investigating the manganese issue that he thinks contributed to that. We're running at 16% for the year in water unidentified losses, which is up a little bit than we would like to see. So we'll be tracking that. And then lastly, wastewater. At our plant, we metered 1.76 million gallons coming in. Unidentified metered usage, which is I&I, just water coming into the system, is 21%, which is starting to look like we're seeing some melt off from the warmer days in January. Overall, for the year, we're running 20% for wastewater.
Is that a little higher than we would normally see?
Year to date, it's not higher.
Okay.
I'm a little surprised to see December and January where they are, but overall year to date, we're running about normal.
Oh, I know we already discussed that in the past, but at some point I would like to have a goal as well for the wastewater. I know we are making progress in preventing infiltration from the runoff into our system, but the goal can be fairly lax, but I think having a sense of what we expect would be nice. So if you could add some kind of if it's not a goal, an expectation mentioned, so we could keep that in mind.
Okay.
So when we set goals, that'd be an operations committee task to tackle that.
And I would push back on that since we're in the third of 5 years of doing improvements to reduce I&I. I think we should finish that project before we start setting arbitrary goals. At least let the project get to full completion and try and eliminate these issues. We know we have a joint separation, for example, in the meadow that we're going to have to deal with this summer that we found from videoing. So things like that is what we're correcting, and I'd like to finish the plan.
So when do you anticipate the plan to be completed?
We're in the third of 5 years.
Or third of 5, or 2 more years. Yeah.
That's why we got the camera and the smoke tester. We've been doing the manhole projects. That's all part of the 5-year plan to rectify the issue that we knew about and was significantly worse before.
So what I would suggest is make a goal to have a goal at the end of the 5 years.
I would say the 6th year, because then we would have all the improvements. Because the improvements have to go through a year, right, before we know what to expect.
Well, what I'm anticipating is you should, since you are working in this plan, you should make progress now. If you compare your loss to previous year, you should be looking better, correct?
It depends on if those fixes were the critical ones. I mean, there could be a cracked pipe in Yarrow that we don't know about that's letting in 50 gallons a minute.
That's not my question. My question is,
I'm giving you an engineering answer so that
are we better this year than we were the previous year?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
I'd like to have this discussion assigned to operations committee, Peter, when we set goals?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yep.
I think industry standards in general are, if you can achieve 25%, I think you're doing pretty good. And I think in the past, we have been near that. And the trends I'm seeing is we're trending in the right direction.
Yeah.
I think when I came in, there was a 37% year.
Right.
And we
It was close to
reduced-
40.
Yeah, 40 to 50 is what it
Yeah.
used to be.
Well,
So
we have to-
I think we're really going in the right direction. That doesn't mean we can't make improvements, but
Yeah, and it doesn't mean we can't have some targets along the way, but let's talk about that
Definitely.
at operations.
got it.
Okay, last comment on aquifer levels. Eric, last month you had asked about the well 2 aquifer level. It's still averaging 22 feet. That is a slightly lower than normal. 24 to 25 this time of year is normal. And in talking to our supervisor, not only is well 2 lower, but all of the wells are lower than average. So something he is watching and trying to balance running wells 4 and 5 less so that we can recover the aquifers as quickly as possible.
With any word or any update on the busy January weekends, what's anything happened to our well levels? Do you know?
No obvious hits from those. Our well levels have been steady or trending slightly upward.
Okay, well, that's good.
And that is all I have on this, unless there are any questions.
Eric, we will have on, and Peter, we will have on operations the scope and fee from the consultant too for the hydrology study and the potential well 6 test well.
Good. I think that's becoming more of a priority.
Okay, good, thanks. Let's move on to item 9C. This is resolution 21-03, declining to establish a procurement target for energy storage systems for Kirkwood Meadows Public Utility District. Brandy, are you up on this one?
I am. So this is a requirement for the district and the board to look at whether energy storage is financially feasible for us at this point. And so included here is a short staff report and then a resolution. The staff report looks at what we would use energy storage for. And basically what we would be looking at using energy storage for is a replacement for the powerhouse, a storage of energy that we would use to eliminate needing to run the diesel generators. We worked with our energy council on this, who provided us a study that told us an approximate cost for these sorts of storage systems, and a 60 megawatt hour system based on this study would cost $121,000 to $166,000. And that would provide us somewhere between 1.5 and 5.3 days of use, depending on the time of year that we had the transmission outage. At this point, since we are still paying off the cost of the powerhouse, which provides us with all the redundancy we currently need, staff has determined that this is not financially feasible to add energy storage at this point, and that's what's reflected in the resolution. This is a requirement that we revisit this topic no more than at a 5-year cycle. And at the point where we do feel that it is financially feasible to add this in, we adopt storage targets and communicate those to the CPUC.
Bob, you probably know the most about this. Is the cost of storage kind of declining, or is it?
Yeah, if we wait 5 years to buy it, it'll be much cheaper than what it is today. The only thing I don't know is currently there are various grants and other incentives, but I don't know if any of them are significant enough to warrant it. But I was very encouraged by the price point. Actually, it's still not cost effective for us, but I think we should factor that into our planning, because there will be at some point it will be there. It also has a reliability benefit that then switching we would have no disruption at all, whereas right now we have a brief pause in the power. So I don't know how to put an economic value on that, but it's certainly a convenience benefit.
Yeah, I
The
have a
other
question.
big benefit, yeah, the other big benefit is if we were ever, you know, assuming growth comes back, then at some point we're sort of near the peak capacity on the generators. And that's where we could also use storage. I think our peak capacity with the generators is 4.5 megawatt. Is that right, Brandy? With all of them running?
Basically, yes. Nameplate value is 5, but 4.5 would be a good target.
So let's suppose that they put in another lift. We start to approach that. Instead of upgrading the generators, we could potentially put in enough storage, charge that during the night, and then we'd have that available, and we could avoid the use of upgrading. We could put off upgrading the generators for some period of time. So that would be the other thing to consider. But waiting a couple of years is just going to be cheaper.
Yeah, I'm curious, how long, when you charge these batteries, how long do they hold the charge for? Do you have to constantly charge them or what?
Well, they're at least as good as your cell phone.
You haven't
'Cause
seen my
it's the
cell
same-
phone.
It's a similar technology. Well, when you bought the cell phone. Yeah, there is a leakage rate. I don't know, Doug, maybe you know the answer to that. I don't know.
I don't know. I was wondering the same thing, but I don't know the answer to that for these
Yeah,
large
okay.
systems.
Well,
We'll find out, Peter. That's a good question.
Okay, I mean, I just out of curiosity.
There's some.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
There is a loss. So similarly, the capacity of this storage system, typically there is a 10-year warranty for 70% capacity. I mean, it changed from producer, but so there is a decay over time. So I'd like to say a few things on that. First, I'm surprised. I've not seen it. Maybe I missed it, but was this topic on operation committee at some point?
No, it was not.
So it was not in planning, it was not in operation. So I would expect that kind of topic to be actually discussed in the committee before we come up with an ordinance.
Unfortunately, there was a time of the essence issue because we received a notice from Cal ISO that we were delinquent in filing these, and these were required since 2014, and the district's not been doing them. So time was of the essence according to our attorney. So we had to get it on the board agenda as quick as possible.
Okay.
But I think, Bertrand, you're right. It'd be good to have this as part of our planning process.
Yes.
Because at some point it'll make sense.
Yeah. So that was my first comment. The second comment is, I think, and it's a general comment at KMPUD, usually here I see a fiscal impact. I'm not seeing environment impact. I think we need to start to be a bit more proactive in assessing whatever we do versus the greenhouse gas emission, for example. So I would like to see, and I know, for example, I don't think there is one goal for Eric which is anything related to the environment. So I think we need to be more proactive in being good steward of the environment. I'm not saying we are not, but I'd like to see the process involving that. Definitively, the other thing on the cost, I was like Bob, I was actually very happy to see that it's fairly cheap actually, because the cost of our electricity via the Out Valley project is cheaper. That's what I thought actually. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it's cheaper than actually generating electricity with diesel. Is that correct?
Much cheaper.
Yes. So I don't see the impact of the saving we would do over these 10 years of expectation. So basically, I think we need to work on it. So now I understand there is a time of essence situation here, but that was not expressed anywhere. So I was not aware of that. But I definitively think that we need to keep that on our radar. And I think storage is going to come to play in the near future in Kirkwood. So I think certainly this 5 years this 5 years time plan is way too long, in my opinion. So that, let me see if I have another comment on that. Yeah, so and basically, actually, I was very pleased with when I see the cost, because I think first it's going to keep going down, and it's actually not bad at all. This is just a one cost capital investment. The same thing, there is no effort to find grant to help us in that area. And so obviously we need to put that on the forefront, not on the back burner. Thank you.
I think one of the things we could do, so avoiding a kilowatt of diesel, we could use 25 cents as the benefit, just as a rough number. We could, as we plan out for how many power outages there's going to be, we could use that number, assume we want a 5 to 10 year return on the storage. And that would give us a target that when storage reaches this price, we could justify it just on the breaking even on the reduced diesel consumption. So we could think about modeling that, and then we'd know what number we're looking for, and then we could sort of project when that might happen, add in some other benefits, and then we know at what price it falls within consideration.
May I suggest
This right now is a little bit outside it.
So may I suggest that when we set goals for next fiscal year, this kind of thing be considered and take into account both the financial and the environmental impacts, but also, you know, to me, the question of, do we invest too soon before the real breakthroughs in storage happen, or better breakthroughs in storage happen? So it's also a timing issue in that way.
Yeah, you have also to put in perspective the fact that not burning diesel is good. So I think
yeah, we could put a number on that as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I agree with Randy's analysis that it's not quite there, but it's much closer than if I had to guess. I wouldn't have guessed the numbers were this good. So I think something good will come out of this in the in the next 5 years.
Okay. So again, finance and planning, please consider goals when we do goal setting.
Yes.
In June or April, May, June,
Yeah.
whenever we do that. Okay. So with after that discussion, is there a motion to adopt resolution 21-03?
Should we ask if people from the audience has any comment?
Of course. Yeah, I mean, just as a general thing, anybody can raise their hand anytime if you have a comment. But yes, are there anyone in the audience would like to make a comment on this?
Just one thought, we've talked a lot about solar installations as well in the valley, and I guess this storage would help with that if people started installing more solar too. It's just something else to keep in mind.
Well, only if they put it in their house.
Right. Well, like I thought that was the concern, right? Is that the many houses and many of the buildings here would put solar up, right?
Yes, but I mean, this storage obviously solves a different problem than somebody putting it behind the meter in their house.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other comments? If not, now I will entertain a motion to adopt resolution 21-03, declining to establish a procurement target for energy storage systems for KMPUD.
Dornberg, so moved.
This is Bob, I'll second it.
Okay, Peter, roll call.
Rickard.
Aye.
Epstein.
Aye.
Schroeder.
Aye.
Perot.
Well, I'm going to make a comment. I was going to vote no on this, but now that I understand the time of essence issue and that it is going to come in the forefront in our various committees, I'm voting yes. Aye.
Thank you.
And Dornberg, aye.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's move on to item 9E, which is the electric rate model. And I know Bob and Eric have been working on this. Whichever wants to take the lead, Eric or Bob?
I'll let Bob take the lead because he has a lot of new information too to share. So.
Okay. Sure, but this is a discussion update. At the last board meeting when we started talking about the base rate and how to think about it, the point was made that we should first come up with a set of policy objectives for a change in the ratio between collection payments through base rate and payments through usage rate are the two things. So, so the Finance Committee met on this. We had a really lively discussion. I also consulted with Severin Borenstein, who's my god when it comes to energy policy, and many others. He's we'll discuss in a minute. He's on the faculty at UC Berkeley as an advisor to the state, advised Gray Davis on how to get out of the energy crisis in the year 2000, and also is a member of the ISO board. But first, starting out, we felt there was three primary policy objectives. The first is to better balance our fixed income with our fixed expenses. Not saying exactly where that number should be, but make it better than where we are currently. The second goal is to make sure that our fixed costs are equitably allocated across all customer usage types. And the third is to look for opportunities to encourage reductions in greenhouse gas emissions by creating a policy that will encourage people that, the primary other energy uses are propane and gasoline, and to have a policy that would encourage the use of electricity over propane and electricity over gasoline. So we felt like those are the three primary policy objectives for the base rate. And everything else is some of the details and insights that we have. So, so I don't know if you want to stop first about the three areas, or then go into some of the details of how we would achieve these three and where the issues are. Eric, do you have a preference?
No, I mean, well, let me just ask: Are these? Yeah, let's just make sure that people agree that these are the goals of this effort. I mean, I certainly agree that these are.
Okay. And there's
hold on. So
yeah.
I do agree they are important goals. The one thing I'm not seeing here again is conservation concern, and when you mention equitably allocated across customer, I think it has to be somewhat responsive to the actual usage of energy. So if we go with the model you develop later, I think this is basically very much slanted against the people that come not often. And I have that's part of the discussion. Yeah.
The word equity means we want to solve those sorts of questions.
Yes.
We're trying to make sure that it's equitable across the different usage categories, or lack of usage categories.
Yeah, and the third one could include the conservation. I mean, it could be part of that as well. I think we need to encourage conservation as well.
Okay. So moving on, the first question, leaving it on the top of the backup, yeah. So looking at our fixed cost and financial stability, the modeling that Eric with a K did, we looked at two main things. In the event of shortfall, significant shortfalls, can we manage it with our cash? And the second question was, can we meet the tier ratios? And so one of the things that we looked at that ended up being positive is a range of base rates where we would still meet the tier ratio even if the ski resort didn't operate it. We called that the Snowmageddon scenario. So what we decided to use for modeling is focused on our avoided cost. So what that means, our avoided cost is 13 cents. And what that means is if we don't need to supply a kilowatt hour to a customer, our savings is 13 cents. And correspondingly, supplying a kilowatt hour costs us about 13 cents. So that's our marginal cost of supplying a kilowatt hour. That number was calculated several years ago. We've been using it for as long as I can remember. And that's also the number that if a solar customer generates more than they use, that's the compensation. Bertrand, you have a
Yes,
question on that number?
yes. I actually before that we were using 33 cents. We got this 13 cents when we moved to the grid supply, and I'd like actually this number to be revisited. I mean, there was an assumption that was made when it was at the beginning of the grid, and now we have a true experience on how much, for example, diesel you need to use in a typical year, and all these things need to be included in that number. So I think this number should be revisited. I mean, the 656 is what we charge now people, but it's also based on a model that was done a number of years. So I really recommend that we actually look into this number again to make sure they are reflecting reality.
Bob, how confident are you in the, or Eric, how confident are you in the 13 cents as the marginal cost?
Well, let me just say that we budget 8.5 cents for the actual power itself, and the rest are variable costs in delivering it. You know, I think I looked at it years ago, but I mean, it's certainly, I agree, it's something that we should periodically revisit, but certainly our cost of power isn't much different than what we thought. It's been quite stable. Over the course of the next couple of years, as we buy more RECs, you have to include that in there. And so the pressure that will be that it'll go up a little, but I suspect it's pretty close. But I agree that that should be periodically looked at. And Brandy, I don't know if you had any, how your memory is on this one.
It's similar. I think that it's pretty accurate, but I agree we could revisit that and just confirm.
Yeah,
Okay, then
it's always appropriate.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That'd be a good thing to do then. Okay.
Yeah. So that says if you subtract the difference, then 53 cents is our fixed costs. But it isn't, our fixed costs are not dependent on the amount of power we consume. Our fixed costs, we have to pay that. And so in our annual model, we take the expected number of kilowatt hour sales and we look at our fixed costs, and it works out to be 53 cents currently. If we sold more kilowatt hours than that, then we're actually receiving more money than we need to cover our fixed costs. So we felt that one of the targets, and Eric will show you this, was to say that we have at least a fighting chance that in Snowmageddon scenario we can meet our tier ratios, and that we also would not be dipping in the cash. So you'll see in the models that we think we can do that in the range of the $100 sort of $100 to $108 fixed cost per EDU.
Bob, can I just, I've got just two comments on this section, the fixed cost and financial stability. And I don't think that really affects what's being presented here, but there are two data points that, one is it says our property taxes are limited to $450,000 in any given year.
Right.
I'm not aware that that's actually the limit. I mean,
yeah, well, let me explain that. That came about, or Eric, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. So when we adopted the water and wastewater rate studies, we assumed a certain amount of property tax allocated to that and based the rates on that. So this is that net number, and that was an average, what those two funds would on average use. So in some years, might that be zero? Yes. But I will tell you the entire debt service model on wastewater for the wastewater plant does include like 325, Bob, I think was on the wastewater, and 80 something was on the water side, 90 something on water.
And if we anticipate a RUS loan, which we do for the wastewater treatment plant, then that's going to be memorialized in the loan agreement.
Right.
So we're just assuming that's going to happen, assuming that we need to conserve those because we said we would. And so 450 is what we expect to happen in the next fiscal year.
Okay, good. That's a
Yeah.
good answer. Thank you. And the
Yeah.
other one is the cash reserves for electricity are targeted at $2 million. The only reserve target that I'm aware of is 25% of annual expenses for the district as a whole. Now, I don't know if that comes out to be 2 million for electricity separately or not. I mean, I know that our expenses, including interest and everything, something like $10.5 million.
Well,
on an operating basis, it's more like 8
okay,
million.
I'll defer to Kelly and Eric. I did that from memory. My memory was that we have $1 million in general cash that can be applied as needed anywhere. And we had $2 million that can only be used for electricity unless it loans it to other entities. But I did that from memory. So if my memory was bad, this would be a great time to correct it.
Well, what I specifically remember is overall 25, 1/4's worth of expenses we want in reserves. And then that could turn out to be 2 million for electricity, including all the interest costs and so on.
Yeah, Kelly, can you fix my memory for me?
Your memory is correct, Bob.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks.
So no surgeon needed.
How much did Bob pay you to say that?
Okay. So if we look at,
I'd like to say something which related to that snow Mageddon or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
So one of the criteria here is the T ratio. And so last year, actually, the T ratio was suspended. And it is quite possible that if there is any nationwide occurrence that, like the pandemic we had, we may have some wigging room there. The bottom line I'd like to say is we actually are doing pretty well. We've been doing well for 10 years. I understand the need to increase stability and I support the idea to increase the balance sheet, the base fee I meant. But I think we are not working with a broken situation here. So what we have now is working. We need to improve it. What I'm seeing here is a drastic change, and I just want to make some caution here. I think sometimes don't fix what's not broken.
Okay. Well, we're not trying to decide on the actual numbers. We're just discussing the objectives. And one of the objectives is to balance our fixed income with our fixed expenses. And so I'm just saying those are some of the tests that we made.
Yeah.
Okay. So moving on to equitable allocation, unless there's other questions on the fixed cost. The two big issues we have with equity, and this is without prejudice or saying where it occurs or doesn't occur. The first is customers that don't really use electricity. So we have $55 million in debt that was put in place to make sure that we had reliable electricity. We are the only location in California that has 100% community redundancy. There's, if we lose our connection to the grid, we still have power. We had days when Heavenly was closed and Kirkwood was open. So there is a value in that. And the question is, for customers that you have no usage, what's a reasonable price that they should be paying for the ability to use power whenever they want? And I'm not trying to answer the question, but saying that that's one category. And that's the only payment in that case are the fixed costs, which are currently $160 a year. So we got 800 meters is $160 a year contribution toward the 55 million in debt. Is that fair, or should it be higher? Or someone wants to argue it should be lower. It's an open question. The second place where equity comes in is we have currently 9 solar customers. They use the grid because the grid allows them to generate power when they don't need it, consume power when they do need it, so that flow of power goes in and out, or at least comes in through the grid, but they do not necessarily pay anything for that, depending on depending on where things end up, and that structure is completely based on the law of how net metering works. We are obligated as a utility to pay when we collect power. We're effectively paying the retail rate. So our avoided cost is 13 cents, but we're paying 65 cents for a kilowatt that comes from solar. That's at least one way to look at it. So so that's the second issue is whether the net metering customers are paying their fair share for the grid. Sure, I'll move on to so those are the two special cases, if you will. The third question is heat and transportation. And this is where I think I made a mistake in the discussions last month. So, you know, right now, propane is so much more cost effective than electricity for doing heat. And gasoline is so much cheaper than electricity at 65 cents that our rates are doing nothing to economically encourage the transition. So if what we do is just have a higher fixed rate that's based on consumption. So it's not really a fixed rate, it's a base rate that's computed based on your consumption and is adjusted on an annual basis, is what we currently do. We are not making power any cheaper. We're just shifting the way you pay for it, and there's an annual catch up. If you consume more, let's say you switch from propane to electricity, in the first year, your base rate won't be affected, but in subsequent years, it would eventually catch up. So we're not really doing anything to make it cheaper over the long term. There is just a kind of a ramp up that occurs. So one way to solve that would be to have, if we have a consumption-based base rate, we could have a different rate for separately metered electric meters for electric vehicles and for propane. That would make the rate lower. So that was the thinking. So when we look at the changes we're proposing, the first one is to choose a different ratio of the revenue we collect by base rate versus usage rate. The second is the EDU model being changed to be based on residential usage, not total usage. The third suggestion is to have an EDU that can be less than 1 for the infrequent customer usage. That helps with some of the equity issues. So those are and the possibility of having a different base rate for separately metered electric heating. Moving on to the next page then.
Can I say one thing here?
Please.
So I think they are good goals, and I support them. Just how far do we go and how quick do we go? People have made investment in a system in their cabin. So when it's a condo, it's usually they have what they have, but you cannot pull the rug from below the feet of people like that in one shot. So whatever we do, I think we should have a transition strategy. Maybe I know we've done that also for the water rate. It's basically on 5 years we are trying to get where we want to be, but we need to be give time for people to adapt to the new system. And I am. Yeah,
Bertrand, I think those are interesting points. Can we save that for the general discussion? I'd like,
Yeah.
They're
My
good points
goal,
just for
yeah,
general discussion. Yeah.
yeah, thank you, Bertrand. Eric, my goal for this meeting is to just make sure we have an understanding of the objectives. Then we'll start doing the analysis, the various scenarios, and then there'll be a public hearing on the proposals. But I want to make sure that we all have a set of objectives to measure things against.
Well, a
And
set of
equity
objectives.
and the abruptness of transition is certainly.
Yeah. So a set of objective and kind of the issues that are open at this,
Yeah.
which
And
is
so transition is certainly
Mm.
one we'd want to include.
Yeah.
So so up until 11 a.m. on Monday, this was our best thinking. And so going on to the next page, I sent this to Severin Borenstein, assuming that he would just endorse it all and say great thinking and please proceed. But he made a couple of observations. He said, good rate design, your base rate is not based on usage, it's based on capacity, and it covers your fixed costs. We've proposed something where the base rate is based on dynamic usage, so it's actually computed based on usage, so it would constantly be moving around. Then he said the other thing is if your variable cost is 13 cents and you charge more than that, you are discouraging the use of electricity over other energy sources. So he said, you know, if your variable cost matched what you charge at 13 cents, then people that want to move from propane to electricity, you know, electricity is the cleanest energy source available in California. It is by law moving to be the absolute cleanest. It's currently cleaner than anything else, and it gets cleaner every single year. And we can make it cleaner even faster than state policy if we want to do that. So why do we have a rate that artificially, in his argument, discourages the transition from propane to electricity? So if it were at 13 cents, there'd be zero economic barriers of people swapping out their propane boiler and putting in an electric boiler. What that would mean is that if our base rate and fixed costs work at 6.8 million kilowatt hours a year, and suddenly that moves up by 200 kilowatt hours, all of our fixed costs are covered. That incremental stuff is just cleaner power being used instead of gasoline and propane as the two examples, or it's convenience. Instead of ice dams building up on your roof, you can afford to melt the snow down. Let's presume that nobody wants to waste heat, which is a point that will come back that we'll need to discuss. If they're just trying to use electricity for better value, at 13 cents, we've eliminated all the economic barriers. And so his argument would be, and he's happy to attend a board meeting and talk about it. His argument would be, our avoided cost should be our usage cost. Our base rate should cover our fixed costs, and we will see an increased use of electricity and a decreased use of propane and gasoline. Then as the debt is paid down, we can gradually lower the base rate. So he suggested we consider that as one of our scenarios. I asked him, I said, so what happened to the period where you want to discourage inefficient consumption? And he said, well, 20 years ago, you might have done that through the fee. The way you would do that today is you would offer incentives for more efficient appliances or better light bulbs or whatever. So he didn't say this specifically, but we could take some number out of property taxes and say that we're offering rebates on things that are proven energy. You know, we could define what they are, but improving energy efficiency should be one of our goals, but discouraging the use of electricity over propane should not be one of our goals. So that blew my mind.
Yeah, it blew my mind too, but I don't have the same level of admiration that you seems to have for the guy, because I think it totally ignore a number of parameters. So it blew my mind too, but in the wrong way. What I would like to say is, yes, first incentive. Actually, I believe that KMPUD is obligated by law to offer some based on SB 1037, 2.85% of our rate revenue, usage rate revenue, and that should be part of the equation actually, should be allocated to program to incentivize people to switch to higher efficiency or to switch to propane versus electricity. And so that's something we definitively need to look at. Also, I'm still stop at the level at for two things. First, if you have such a high rate, which remember it happened because we spent 55 million to get a grid connection, which is for about 700 units. So this is about 75K that we spend for each unit. So which we made that decision 10 years ago, and people were not really invested in that decision. So now basically we are putting a system where you pay almost the same if you use electricity or not. And that to me is morally wrong. I don't know if it's legal, but I know it's not ethical. We should encourage conservation.
Bertrand,
Again, what? We are talking.
Again, can we save that for the discussion at that point where we're talking about the actual models? I mean, you've made your point, which is a good point, but it's one of the goals to make this as equitable as possible, and we can discuss what equitable as possible means. Yep. But unless Bob and Finance Committee, are you after the kind of feedback that Bertrand is providing now?
If so, what we're really looking for now is to understand the objectives, and then we can try different models. Eric put a few in that we've run so far to show you what it might look like to try to solve and to see what this is. And the analysis goes down to looking at every individual meter and its impact. But we need to do it against something. And so the goal for today is just a discussion on understanding what the objectives are.
Well, maybe just to pick up Bertrand's point, I think one of the objectives, maybe a sub-objective of the equitable, is to be sure that, well, Bertrand, why don't you suggest a sub goal to the equitable part of it?
Yeah. So let me ask you a question first. So with a 13-cent model, what would be the base fee?
Well, we're prepared to show you those.
Okay.
We're ready.
Whatever it is. So let's say.
But you think you have to understand by having an EDU less than 1, that's how we adjust the impact on the unattended house, the houses that don't consume. So you could pick an EDU of 0.001 and you'll get back down to $160 a year.
The problem I have with that is very arbitrary. So we are basically putting a system, then we tilt it back on an arbitrary fashion. So anyway, so back to the goal question here. We need to have a system that encourages conservation and that reflect actual usage. And actually, and so people are incentivized to be efficient.
Okay, I'd like to ask, I asked this last time, I got an answer. I'm not sure I believe the answer. And this is for Bob, for Doug, for Bertrand. What I don't quite understand is from a carbon perspective, from a carbon output perspective, if we were to achieve 100% renewable, whether it's through the purchase of RECs, which we can do right now on a voluntary basis, or otherwise, then what is the overriding need for conservation? What does that accomplish? What does conservation accomplish if in fact, I mean, we've got a 10 megawatt capacity on our line, we're using 3.5. What's the purpose of conservation under that circumstance?
Saving the planet.
No, if it's all
No.
100% renewable, what?
Oh, okay, even 100% renewable has a cost. If you take a battery system based on lithium, we don't compute all the upfront costs to produce the system. So whatever you do, we are going to use Earth's planet. So I'm not saying we should stop living, but we need to have a conservation goal because the planet is overcrowded. And if we don't do anything, we won't have any more snow in Kirkwood.
So your point is, okay, so your point is that conservation, even if we were 100% solar, wind,
we need
hydro,
to be efficient. We need to be efficient. Yes.
It's just that
Those are two different concepts, conservation and efficiency.
Well, both work together.
But let me just finish.
Conservation is
Can I
avoidance
finish
and
Can I
inconvenience.
finish my sentence? I think I understand what you're trying to say. I just want to make sure. What you're saying is that by conservation, there will be fewer solar farms, fewer wind turbines, fewer batteries, and therefore fewer impacts from the upfront cost of constructing the infrastructure. That's what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah. There is, I mean, the REC system has biased people in thinking that you can rec out your consumption and the expense of the planet. It's not true. We are balancing our emission, but not the resource use.
But solar panels on roofs, same thing, right?
Same thing. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
Although we want to encourage a conversion from propane as well.
That's correct.
So that would drive an increase in consumption, right?
Yeah, if we want a rate that will get people, every single household and every future development interested in electric heat instead of propane, 13 cents will do it.
Yeah, and I think there's even a retrofit opportunity there. One of my neighbors just emailed me and said, "Do I know a contractor? He needs to replace his furnace and his water heater."
That's right.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
So
that's why
that's easy picking.
Yeah, my furnace is almost 20 years old. I want to replace it in the next couple of years. If the rate were 13 cents, I wouldn't hesitate to make it an electric heat boiler.
Yeah.
At 25 cents, I wouldn't consider it.
Yeah, but again, we need to give time for people because this is your situation. Some people have spent the same amount of money to get a system 5 years ago, and so just let's be smooth. Let's be. The other thing I heard one time was Eric saying that people cannot disconnect from the account. Basically, is that correct, Eric? That once you connect,
they can disconnect.
No, they cannot disconnect their electric meter. Everything else they can disconnect.
Okay, so here we are. So basically, we are a system where we change the game, and people have no recourse. So it's basically a tyranny system. So I think
I disagree. You are making an assumption that we're going to come up with something that works that way, and I object to you assuming that we're just going to figure out some way to screw people. We're looking at every individual case, and our goal is that you don't pay any more per year than you were paying before. It flows differently, but if you increase your consumption by getting rid of propane, it's going to be cost effective. That's what we're trying to do.
No, I don't doubt your good intention, Bob, no problem. What I'm saying is today, we are not allowing people to disconnect. Why is that? So basically, you force a new system on people.
Well, you can disconnect. You just pay a new connection fee if you come back, right?
Yeah, but if you don't, no. What Eric says, you cannot disconnect from electricity.
Yes, that was implemented due to the $55 million investment. That is
Oh,
correct.
okay.
Same with
Oh, all
Vail.
right.
They can't get an alternate source. They can disconnect from propane anytime they want. Disconnect from, water, wastewater. They can disconnect all those, but not electric. And that well predates me, but that was why it was done. That's why the ordinance was written that way.
Okay. Good to know. So there are 4 locations that have meters but no houses.
That's correct.
All right. So if the solution is to do something special for those 4 locations, I hope the board will consider it.
I'm curious, John, and is Doug still on, or has he?
I'm here.
Oh, there's Doug. Okay. You're on the finance committee. I'm just curious, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to add to what Bob has presented?
I'm supportive of it, and I also think this is kind of, I think, overdue for a change. I mean, I think the base rate was set a long time ago and hasn't been revisited, and the world's changed pretty dramatically. Considering the Out Valley project, and that big investment that was made by PUD. So I actually think a change is overdue here. And while I think we need to make it palatable for all of our customers, we also have to hit a set of numbers that we think will support a more equitable situation going forward. And I don't think we can change that too often in the future. So I think we have to make a big enough change that'll service us for 10 years.
Doug, do you have anything to add to that?
Really, I mean, I think I mentioned something similar at the last board meeting too. I think of the cost structure as there's the purely variable, there's the purely fixed, and there's these things that kind of could be argued in some ways in between. And I think the 13 cents per kilowatt hour is the purely variable, and then the purely fixed are things like the hookage of literally what's the marginal cost of adding one more person's unit and metering and stuff, and everything else is in between. And I think what we're trying for is in the right direction. I think there will be I think what Bob said, I agree with in terms of the overall rate impact. If you assume that the same consumption perhaps would be the bill impact, but I do think if you move from 66 to 13 cents, even though there's a fixed charging charge, there probably is some elasticity where people are going to see that pretty quickly and say, maybe I won't replace all my light bulbs, which is the first thing I literally did when I moved into my place. And so that's where the energy efficiency types of conversations come into play. And I think that those are things that we need to keep in mind as we're playing this out. But I think this is definitely in the right direction. I think the 66 cents is way too high relative to the marginal cost.
I understand that Howard Hoffman has his hand raised. Hi, Howard. You need to come off of mute.
Yeah, I have a question. So is this discussion solely on residential? What about the ski area? What about other commercial?
It's on all of our customers.
And
it affects, yeah.
And how do we chart? Okay, so how would this impact the ski area? What would their bill?
They would pay exactly the same amount annually as they're currently paying. But if they ever got around to those new lifts that they keep talking about, they could those would be incremental kilowatt hours.
They will have an EDU calculation, right, Bob?
But they will have an EDU. They will have an EDU calculation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the analysis we've done, which we can show you, and what we still have to finish, is it has no, for almost all customers, it has no impact on their annual costs, assuming that their usage is the same as the average for the last 6 years. However, if they decided to convert their propane to electric, it would not affect their base rate. They would just pay the incremental usage. So by making that base rate fixed rate and not a usage based base rate, they have an incentive to convert. They also so that's kind of the observation. If we separately meter it, we can have a custom rate, but the separate metering means just please rewire your house and put in a new meter, you know, and a couple $1,000s later, we can talk about your boiler that probably costs less than your conversion. But if we just say it's 13 cents, your next kilowatt that you use over your average is 13 cents. I just don't see any barriers to reducing the propane.
So Bob and
How does that make sense to you? I mean, I really want to know what you
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in other words, on that topic, basically any new development would be subsidized by the valley because the base
No,
rate would have been fixed before.
no, what would happen is that they would get their EDU calculation based on similar properties, and we would have more base rate, and we could retire the debt faster, and the cost would go down for everybody. There is nobody subsidizing another customer. There's no need for that.
Well, if there is a drastic change in usage, once you set if you set, so you say the base rate will be based on the fixed cost, but the fixed cost will go down over a year. So you
Right,
cannot,
and
yeah,
that will allow us to lower the base rate over time. It is true that if somebody built a house 30 years from now, you know, they're getting a benefit of the rest of our investments. I don't have
absolutely.
a proposal of how
That
to
would be in the
back pay
connection
for
fees,
that.
Bob.
What's that?
The connection fees, whenever
The
we
connection
revisit
fees
those,
compensate
would
that, right?
basically, they'd have to pay a buy-in for the existing infrastructure. That's what a connection fee is for future customers.
Well,
Good
let me, if we go with such a system, I think connection fees should be reevaluated as well.
But we
Well,
have
we
that
are.
system now, and I totally agree that all connection fees should be reevaluated.
Yeah.
We got to get through these rate studies first, but you and I are 100% in
Okay.
alignment on that. Connection fees need a serious revisiting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Across the
Eric?
board. I'm not just talking electric either. This
Bob?
is water, wastewater, propane. So just, I think you agree with that, Bertrand, all utilities, right?
So Bob and Eric, I think we have an interesting opportunity. You tell me if you think it's worthwhile. But a neighbor sent out an email. Maybe this could be the same email that John got. I don't know. But a neighbor sent out an email to a number of people around him to say, I need to replace my boiler. Does anybody know a good installer or any recommendations and so on? So I immediately wrote him back and said, you should know that we're going to have this discussion, and it may be that we change the rate structure such that an electric system might be more attractive to you than a propane system for environmental reasons, cost neutral, and so on, safety reasons. Anyway, what he said to me after some discussion was he'd be willing to be sort of a test case if it was useful to take an actual situation, a home with a certain amount of BTU consumption, I guess we would say, as reflected today in propane use. You know, what would it take? What rate would it take to make him feel like, okay, this is now worthwhile to change from something he understands, propane, to something new, electric? I mean, is that an analysis that would be reasonably easy to do, given the data that we have on each resident's propane use and so on?
The customer could certainly do it themselves. I mean, it wouldn't be hard.
Well, that assumes that he understands how to convert BTUs and cubic feet and so on.
Why don't you just have him contact me and see if I can help him. It depends on what other propane appliances he has in the household too. That would.
Yeah, well, I mean, he wasn't asking for this. I was wondering if this was an opportunity for us. I mean, he wasn't asking for a favor. I'm the one who suggested it to him. Now, I don't want to say you can do it yourself. I'll just say that it's not something
Yeah,
that the district wants to do.
No,
all
we
it
can do
requires
it, I
is
just
to
need more
figure
data.
out, yeah. All it requires is to figure out of their total propane use, how much of it goes into heating.
Exactly.
And you could do that by kind of saying, what's the difference between their summer and winter usage,
Yeah.
assuming the number of days they're there. And then that tells you the BTUs in propane, you convert it to electricity multiplied by the efficiency factor, and even electric resistive heating, all it does is make heat. So it's
Okay, well,
it's
I
probably
think
pretty
that,
efficient.
Eric, I'll say, I think just from a communications perspective, I mean, given that there's going to be a change here, and we've talked about some of the communication side of this already in our last meeting, and I think that this is an idea where, I know other utilities do these sorts of things of just even any rate, like they offer 6 different rates, they'll measure your, load profile and tell you which rate that they would recommend. And this is something else that the utility district could consider, is having, calculators that say, type in your account number, when you log into your account, we're going to analyze these types of things for you, and not binding off, obviously, but here's what our estimates are of what your trade-offs would be. And that could be something that we consider as a public relations benefit as a rate like this is considered.
I think that's a good idea.
Doug, is that what you mean? Conversion?
Say again, Eric, sorry?
For conversion? Is that what you're talking about?
Exactly. Just like, hey, this is what would make sense. This, given your profile and what you use for heating, this would make sense for you whenever you might need it, or given the timeline of what your last installation is or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. No,
But then whatever assumptions you want.
When we do our rate, when we do rate increases, Bob has a calculation that goes out to every customer. Here's how this will impact you individually. I don't think that it would be a far stretch, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, but to take that same model and just give them a comparison of here's propane, assuming this, and here,
Yeah, we could make a couple of assumptions and probably
Right.
get it vaguely right. I mean, it can't be lower than 13 cents. That's our avoided cost, and we're not going to subsidize it. It could be higher,
Agreed.
but 13 cents is the bottom, because that's our actual avoided cost.
Well, when I asked him if that would be something that he'd be willing to volunteer his situation to us to analyze. The reason I asked that, and this goes to somewhat I think what Bertrand is getting at, is obviously from the next pages we see, the higher the use rate, the lower the base rate can be. And so the question is what's the highest that the use rate can be, but it's still low enough to incent somebody like this person to say, I'm going to make a conversion. And I don't know if it's 13, I don't know if it's 15, I don't know if it's 18. I don't know what it is.
The last time I did the analysis, it was about 15, but we need to redo it again.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I will let him know that we're probably not going to do this. Thanks for the offer, but we probably won't do it.
I'd be happy to do that calculation for America. I would be happy to do it. I just have him call me though, because I need to ask some questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good.
It won't take much
Thank
effort. John already did the yeoman's work of the calculations and the memo that he and I worked on. So it wouldn't be a big deal. Again, like Bob said, make a few assumptions. But yeah, no, definitely have him contact me.
Okay.
I think
thanks, Eric. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I would like to add, actually, we had a heat pump study that was done on 3, not industrial, but big site in the valley. And actually, this should be revisited as well with this new model that we are going to come up with to see how heat pump actually become more feasible in Kirkwood financially. And so it's a very same principle that we could apply to a few residential. So we have already, there was a snow melt for Vail, another one was a condominium. And so we could actually put together, take a few cases to see how they fare with this new model. I think that'd be useful.
Yeah, I guess the point I'm trying to make is at 13 cents, we've eliminated the economic barrier, and people will want to consider this.
Well, actually, I go beyond that. At 13 cents, everyone should shift because it's going to be so much cheaper. Beyond economical, it's going to be beneficial. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I will say that at 13 cents, though, I do think that, I think Bertrand, you made the point earlier that there are people who've made some long-term investments, and I'm thinking about solar customers as well. And I think to that same concept before of I don't think you should design a rate where there's like 4 people impacted on one side or 4 people on another, and you could have still a net metering, rate that is different from the 13 cents, for example, for solar customers. I don't know. There are things that we could think about that are not having to design one rate that fits every use case when there are maybe 4 or 5 outliers on either end of things who are zero consumption or solar.
Okay, and Bob, why don't you go on, or Eric, why don't you go on to
So-
your next sheets, pages?
So Eric, you want to move on to the next page? Or, so just, yeah. And there's the comments from the finance committee I've heard there with the key thing is we don't want a constant reevaluation. If we're doing a major change, we want to study it and get it right and not do a lot of adjustments. Also, suggestion that in the fixed rate itself that we clearly identify what portion of that is debt service, which is most of it, so people have a better understanding of where it comes from and why there's hope that it could go down. So the next page are some modeling that we tried. There's a lot of data on here, but I'll let Eric just sort of give the overview of what it is. But I'd also say that all of this is draft. We need to do more studying and some more validation. But Eric, do you want to just give people the lay of the land?
Sure. So we looked at quite a few different various options. So one of the things we originally did was look at cost allocation method, which is what we used for water and wastewater when we redid the rate study there. So that was the starting point from where we started all this for consistency of rate structure, is looking at that. So that's what the target revenue was based on. As Bob mentioned earlier, we also looked at what would happen in the snowmageddon or snowpocalypse, where we had zero revenue, and we backed into that. We made some assumptions about Vail's usage, Vail's housing, et cetera, basically being zero, and what that meant, and looked at that as well. And it was similar to these numbers. It was a little bit closer to 50-50, which is where you get into these numbers over here, looking at that. So that's the second way we did it, was what if we didn't have any resort revenue? So this first set of data, these first 4 columns, or sorry, the first 3 columns are based on cost allocation. The middle 2 columns are based on snowpocalypse, snowmageddon. And then the last 2 are based on the 13 cents as recommended by Severin Bornstein. And that was using the 3-year average of what an EDU is defined as. Just for giggles, Bob and I wanted to see what a 7-year average was. It was 229 kilowatt hours. So it makes me very confident that the EDU definition is very good. But it also looks at a longer term usage by customers to balance out the changes in ownership and those sorts of things. So we ran those various options, and I'll shorthand what finance's comment was. They liked this 3rd column because the bulk of customers were in this minimal change area. Nearly 500, actually over 500 customers were in this de minimis change, either a slight decrease or a slight increase, and then very few in the high increase area. And then looking at the 50-50 allocation, again, where did that happen? And again, it happened at half an EDU, with over 500 of our customers being in that de minimis impact range, which the board has said is a goal, and we heard that, and we've really tried to see what that was. Shifting, going over to the 13 cent models, again, it really comes down to that half EDU really accounts for customers that are very conservative with their electric usage, such as Kelly or myself, Peter, very conservative with their use, or also absentee owners. It really accommodates that and really smooths out the impacts to our customers. The same with looking at the 7-year average. It's that half EDU really makes a big difference. So with that, those are the scenarios we looked at. A lot of those came from board requests that we look at them. A lot of them came from out of finance and more recently out of Severin's suggestions. So that's that.
I have a question on the EDU. So what you use here is current EDU system, that not a revised system. So currently the
No, we do
EDU.
not. This is not the current EDU system. That's incorrect.
Oh, okay. So
this is based on this. So this EDU is residential usage, average residential usage over the last 3 years. This is average residential usage over the last 7 years. The current system is average usage of all customers.
yes. Okay. So I'm glad you made that change. I'm surprised you make no difference because we were already at 225 before.
No, they're both residential, Bertrand. This is residential and this is residential. They're both.
One's 7 year and the other is 3 years.
Yeah. No, I understand that. But what we used before in the previous model you showed a few months ago, the EDU was based on the average of all consumption, and we are already at 225. So
no. The average consumption of all is about 750.
769 was the number for 3 years for all customers.
okay, so now I'm confused because the model you showed in the past was already 225 kilowatt hours.
Yes,
that was
for
the one that we showed last month was using residential average.
Oh, okay. I didn't know you had changed that. Yeah.
Yeah, and
yeah. I totally support that.
Yeah, in the past it was all customer averages.
Yep. So we need to change
your house compared with Chair 6. Right?
Make more sense. Otherwise, it's not an equivalent dwelling.
It's like including Bill Gates in the average salary.
Voila, exactly.
Yeah. Or Jeff Bezos, I guess, since Bill is retired.
Well, what I'd like to suggest maybe as a goal, at least for me, what I keep looking at here is how can we get to absolutely no customer in the greater than $60, at minimum, zero there, and yet have the usage rate still low enough so it doesn't represent a barrier to converting from propane to electricity.
I don't believe that's doable, Eric.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
I've run the models. Having run the models, I don't know.
Let me just say, if you say, tell me the model that does that, it has two components. One is the lower the minimum EDU, the closer you can get there. And the other would be to have a ramp up for certain customers that the base rate builds over time.
No, I mean, for example, I mean, I don't know, and I certainly take Eric's word for it, but if we had for certain customers a 0.25 EDU, I mean, I'm particularly thinking about the 9 solar,
right?
In particular, those I don't know if any other would justify that.
So disconnected people. I mean, there are 4 people that don't have a house and they have a meter. They use nothing and they would pay a lot more.
Well, anyway, I'm curious. I mean, a lower EDU for certain customers that would only apply to them, and then 15 cents rather than 13 cents. I mean, what does that do? Does that? I mean, how far can we eliminate the over $60 category? That's what I'm wondering.
Okay, and you have to recognize that you also want to compare that as a percentage. If that was an extra $60 a month and it was Chair 6, I wouldn't spend a lot of time because it's just a small percentage. If that's $60 and it's somebody who's paying next to nothing currently, then that's an extra $60. So you have to look at it as a percentage, not just the absolute number. And so, we'll do that in more detail when we're ready to present the numbers. And we
just to tell you, I just ran 0.1 just for giggles. I still have 60s. Just to say the EDU down to 0.1.
I mean, how much does it change? I'm just curious.
There's quite a few in this. I mean, there's 62.
If someone consumes 0 power, they're currently paying $14 a month. Right, and so if the base rate's $140 and they're 1 EDU and 0.1, I mean, that's what it would take, but that could be a customer that uses a lot of power.
Yeah, okay, well, okay, I guess my my goal, since this is a goals discussion, is my goal, I would love to see on a percentage basis that nobody gets hit really hard, whatever that means. And yet the use rate needs to be low enough to be a clear incentive to change. And I don't know what those numbers are and how close we can get to that, but that's what I would look for in favor.
Well, it might also be, I think, what Doug suggested a little while back, which is you have to look at these oddball cases like empty lots.
Well, yeah, and the thing is
Because
that
you don't want to, I think
Yeah.
we don't want to have the whole model impacted by an
Yes.
outlier like that.
yes, no,
Yeah.
I agree with that, and I would put the 9 solar customers who have made their investment based on one set of assumptions.
Yep.
Yeah.
But those 9, maybe those 4. I'm not talking about lifts and big users, and I'm even not even talking about someone who built a very large house and then uses it 1 or 2 days a year. I mean, I'm not even talking about them. So I'm talking about the 9, the 4, and I'm not sure if there's anything else.
Yeah, but that could be addressed via policy. I mean, we could have specific rule for specific situations.
Right, but okay. So anyway,
But you also have to consider $14.64 is equitable for having the service available too, right? I mean, if you have a house that's empty and you're not consuming anything, there is some value that you can show up and heat the house.
Yeah, and that's probably higher than $15. It could be $50 or whatever. I don't know,
Right,
but
right.
yeah.
Okay, are there other comments that have to do with goals or directions that Bob and the Finance Committee?
Well, I'd like to compliment Bob actually and Eric. I think this is moving in the right direction.
Thank you.
I promised you yesterday you would be happy with where we're going, Bertrand. You didn't believe me, but now you believe me. I like it.
Eric,
All I
I
want is to make you happy.
Thank you.
somebody's got a question.
Yeah, Peter.
Oh, Peter, hi.
Is this going to be subject to a Prop 218 election?
No,
change?
But historically the board has followed 218 on electric, even though it's not required to. It's probably just good policy in this case, but it's not required.
Yeah. So in the timeline of the rate, I'm sorry, Peter. In the timeline, Eric, of the rate change, my goal is to have this in place for July 1st. When would we hold the public hearing?
I don't believe we can hit June or July 1st. January would need to have been the first rate model and first hearing.
Well, last time we did this, it was March when we did the rate hearing.
I thought March was but the study was published in January, I thought, and then the hearing was in March, and then the 90 days vote, and then, or 60 days vote. I'll have to go back and look.
Yeah, I guess a timeline would be a good thing, so we know when we need to make decisions and how it will feed into our budget.
I thought we were working for July 1st.
We punted down the road 2 months in a row, so I don't think we're on track.
So we could look at August 1st.
Let me give you a definitive answer if you can bear with me for a moment.
Okay.
Okay, while he's doing that, then my question to you, Bob, and to the Finance Committee is, do you have kind of the direction you need to continue to model and come up with a firm proposal?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, and I just want to, with a few things I jotted down was, to confirm the 13 cents as our marginal cost, to consider what might be phased in or might not. And that small percentage, I can't remember what you said it was, Bertrand, 2.5%, something like that, that's supposed to go to provide specific incentives.
Yeah, there is 4 things: efficiency, energy conservation. That could be just insulation. That still impact the consumption. Low income and R&D. And R&D would be in our situation to actually do some test site to see how things work and stuff on the heat pump, for example, water heater, heat pump could be used in Kirkwood based on what I was told. But actually, I don't think there is any there. It'd be interesting to have someone set up one. And so that's the kind of thing that R&D would cover. It's basically the applicability of technology in Kirkwood.
Well, anyway, it would be good to know
Yeah.
How that works for us, how it affects us, et cetera.
Yeah. And also has something on low income. That's something we actually discarded at planning committee a few months ago. But actually, if we have a budget allocated to that, that could change the way we could approach that. So we could help low income people in the valley.
Eric, do you have your calendar thing?
I'm still looking. I'm trying to find the board agenda where we set it, but we did.
Well, maybe you could just, I think I'd like to move on. It's about 10 o'clock now. Can we move on? Okay, I'm going to say now that Bob and Finance Committee, you've got what you need to continue on.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, we go from one interesting topic to another. Item 9F is a resolution 21-04 adopting solid waste rate service charges. Eric.
I'm just going to presume everybody's read this, so I'll hit the highlights. ACES incurred some increases outside of their control from both County of Sacramento and County of Amador. Additionally, they have the annual CPI. And so they, per the contract, they are passing those changes on to us effective March 1st. It was about a 21.7 increase on their rates. Additionally, as Kelly's been saying for probably close to a year now, our solid waste is significantly higher due to increased disposal in the valley, and we're running at a huge deficit, about 75% increase in terms of our overall costs in solid waste. So recommendation was that we would increase rates to deal with both the increase from ACES and the increased cost to the district. Finance Committee recommends implementation of the rate proposal. The board's obviously hearing it today, and we propose the new rates should take effect March 1st to coincide with ACES new rates. And so the new rates would go from 27.47 to 37.91, effective March 1st through June 21st, and then increase at the CPI as originally the 3% CPI that was used in the previous study.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the board or from the audience on this, or comments?
No, I just want to confirm that the Finance Committee reviewed this, and we either abandon the service or cover its costs.
Yeah.
There's two unpleasant choices.
So yeah, I'd like to support that. Anyway, we need to have each enterprise, business or entities sustained by its own revenues. So we don't have a choice here. The one thing I'd like, and I've got several feedback from various people, that they're really concerned about poaching. And so I think we need to have some kind of do a better job at catching and having a system so we can prevent poaching, because it does increase our cost.
Absolutely agreed. I believe we have implemented significant improvements to stop poaching over the last 6 months, including video, as I've said multiple times, but I'll say it one more time. For the first time in the history of the district, we actually fined someone for poaching and they paid. So, you know, since we've had solid waste since '94, we finally, under my watch, we finally find someone. So I would argue that we are doing everything we can to stop poaching that's economically feasible.
The other thing we discussed in finance is to let people know that, because this is volume based, it's not weight based. So when people put in a box and don't break it down first, less stuff fits in. So we thought we'd do a newsletter article to remind people of how they can help keep the cost down.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking about that. I see people throwing big cardboard that take a lot of space. So
yeah,
That may be something communication can work on to send a notice to the community.
Yeah.
And the last thing I wanted to discuss is the issue. I'm not sure. I think we talked about that last time. I'm not sure if I made any progress on the fact that there is actually more work for beans that are not located at KMPUD but across the valley. Have we done anything here to actually allocate the proper cost?
No, so that would come in the mandatory solid waste ordinance. We have talked about that, but that was backburnered in favor of fixing the electric rates. So that is a lower priority as set by the board, but it is still on our radar to bring back.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
that would be considered, absolutely. I mean, that's been a huge bone of contention with me, that's the way it is. So
so should we? Okay, we need to move fast on the rate, but I suggest that we actually move on that as well. Yeah.
Eric, I have two questions. One is, does this new rate, did I read the report correctly to say that this new rate will chip away and ultimately eliminate the current deficit that solid waste has? I mean, the accumulated deficit, not just, in other words, we've got an accumulated deficit now. Is this intended to fix that as well as keep us neutral going forward?
it is not designed to do that, but my thinking in going into this is as people shelter in place at their primary residences and leave Kirkwood, this will start righting itself. I don't anticipate we're going to continue to see, 600 people living here year round as time goes on. So I think that's going to shift. So eventually it will catch up with it, but I did not include the payment of any existing interfund loans or deficit in this structure.
Oh, okay. So I just wasn't, when you said eliminate the deficit currently experienced, that means that just the monthly deficit.
I mean, from March 1st forward, eliminate the deficit is what I should have said.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah,
My second question is just, it really doesn't have to do with the rate directly, but I'm just curious. Seen a lot of publicity in the recent months that stuff that's theoretically recycled really isn't recycled. Do we know that the things, I know that everything ultimately just goes into the same truck, even though we've got different bins. Do we know that where the stuff is taken, it's actually separated out? And
yes, it's separated at the Buena Vista landfill.
Okay.
They have a sorting station there.
Okay. Have you ever seen it or witnessed it?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Is it pretty effective?
Unfortunately, I have seen it.
Yeah.
Very gross. I'd rather be in the wastewater plant. Let's put it that way.
And is it fairly effective, do you think?
Yeah, the great irony of it is they have to break open every one of those orange bags because they can't assume that people actually did right. So those orange bags really accomplish nothing at the end of the day. So they have to bust into them and make sure that they're sorted properly.
No.
So it's actually
on that front, also maybe something that we can add in the communication committee letter. Should we discourage people to use plastic? I mean, since it's going to be opened up anyway, so it's at work. So maybe people should just pull their bin in and that's it. What do you think?
That's a good point. It's definitely something I can run by ACES and see if that would do anything, benefit them in any way.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll ask the question, or Rick, or one of us will talk to Joe or Johnny, and we'll get an answer for you.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments from the board or from the audience on this matter? Not.
There is a raised hand.
On,
Yes.
you're still muted on.
Sorry. Hi, everybody. I just wondered, and this is probably an ACE thing anyway, but could there be a list posted somewhere on what is acceptable and what isn't? Because I always forget.
On what aspect? Because there's
on what
things.
On what you're allowed to throw away.
It's posted at the dump site, and it's been in a couple newsletters recently.
Oh, okay. I guess I just missed it. Okay, thank you.
And you're all the communications on, darn it.
I know. I am so falling down on the job.
No, I'll forward that to you again, but yeah, it's out there. And then next time you go make a dump run, just look at the signs on the tree, on the dumpsters. They're all there.
Okay, great.
They're above the town line, so you should be able to see them.
Well, the addition of the sign is a good thing, actually. Yes, I totally support that.
Okay, then, if that's all the comments and so on, then I'll entertain a motion to adopt Resolution 21-04, which is a resolution of the board to adopt solid waste service charges as described in Exhibit A. Is there a motion to adopt this resolution?
A motion to adopt?
Yes. So John moves to adopt. Is there a second to that?
I second.
Bertrand seconds. Okay, Peter, roll call.
Rickert,
Aye.
Epstein,
Aye.
Schroeder,
Aye.
Perot,
Aye.
Dornbrook, aye. All aboard.
Great, thank you.
I can answer Bob's question. I'll go back really fast. Yes, March is when we first noticed. June is when we had the hearing. So if we can sort it out in the next 28 days.
Okay. Well, let's see if we can, because I think we have a number of condos considering solar.
Yeah.
And the economics is going to be a little different. I don't want them to get ahead of their skis, as they say.
Yep.
I don't ski, so I don't know what that means, but I'll trust you on that one, Bob.
It means you don't fall down.
Oh, I do that well.
Yeah. Okay, item 9G is ordinance 21-01 concerning propane and electric meter protection and point of service delivery. Eric.
There's a lot of meat in this, and again, I'm going to assume everybody did their due diligence and read it all, but this incorporates all the comments from the board at the last time it was heard in September. Operations Committee has reviewed it, made additional changes, or requested additional clarifications and changes. In October, was sent to District Council, brought back to Operations in January, and unanimously recommended approval. And did request one clarification if it would be retroactive. The answer is no. The time would start tolling on all the timelines from the date of adoption. That was, I think, your question, Eric.
That was my question, yeah. So the 9 months, the 7 months, the 5 months, the 12 months, whatever those months are, would start at the date of adoption.
Correct.
As
and
opposed
I think
to
it actually says in the ordinance,
days. Yeah.
It says 23 days.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be posted and it'll take effect 30 days after passage. So if it's passed today, it would take effect on March 13th. And that's when time would start tolling.
Okay. So it's not a matter of when a notification is received. It's a matter of this.
Well, we would start the process. So we would start resending all those previous letters, et cetera.
Okay. Okay, so there's a lot to this. Let's open up to questions from the board or comments from the board. Bertrand?
So there are good things and I think that still need to be adjusted in my opinion. So let me just explain my thinking here. So the last two propane explosions we had, one of them was a tree that fell through the roof and burst some pipe in the kitchen area. And there's nothing this ordinance is going to help to prevent another repeat. The other one was a deck that basically collapsed over a meter and also ruptured the pipe. And so this one actually has been considered by Pele, the civil engineer, in his letter. And basically he said that the change in the meter protection that he is advocating for would not protect against catastrophic failure such as a deck collapse. So I'm not saying, I just want to put things in perspective. So what I'm saying here, I support the improvement of the meter structure, but I wish there would be also something on evaluation of the situation. So when a meter is actually under a deck and the deck is not maintained, over time it becomes a risk. There's one thing that is also happening in the valley, especially in KMA, I think, because it's older. There are a number of meters that are exactly where the roof shed, which is a big risk. So I think this ordinance should also tackle the situation that actually are not helped by the meter structure. So that's my first comment.
Can I respond to that? There was no deck collapse.
Yes, please.
Yeah, there was no deck collapse that caused the second one. That was ice. That was snow creep that caused the second one.
I was told it was a deck collapse. So you
I sat through 3 days of deposition.
Yeah. I'm not disputing what you say.
I'm just telling you how it is.
That's what I was under the impression. So
and the other one that didn't explode, but also was, which you weren't on the board back then, but there's a nice picture of one of our operators digging down in a hole and our firefighters there. It was ice creep as well under deck that broke a union, I believe, Brandy, or is a double union, and broke it and started leaking propane into their basement. We caught that one before it blew up, but barely, and I do mean barely. If the housekeeper had called from her cell phone, she probably wouldn't be with us today. So just so you know, yes, we're and to answer your second point, the assumption that we're not looking at meters that are under decks or other places is not correct. We are looking at all meters no matter where they are.
I'm not saying you're not doing it. I'm saying it's not in the ordinance, and I wish it would be.
It is in the ordinance because those could fall into a tier 2 or a tier 3 just as easily as a tier 1. It's each individual situation. Each propane meter is analyzed for its appropriate tier, whether it's under a deck or not. So it's uniform across all.
Okay, if you so that bring me to the tier thing. So I think a tier at some point in the letter in the ordinance, you are basically saying tier determination would be notified. I think it's important that the justification of it would be explained to the homeowner. So if it's because of a deck situation, if it's because of whatever else, I don't think it should be just you are in tier 2, 3, or 4 or else. And I think I would like that to be included in the notification.
This ordinance reflects board direction, so this is how we wrote it. So if the board wants to change that,
but typically a notification, wouldn't it say give some explanation? I mean, it wouldn't just be we've inspected it, you're a tier 3, without some explanation of why it's tier 3.
Randy,
yes, we've developed a checklist that we will be taking out to do all of these inspections, and when this notification goes to the homeowner, that can be included.
Yeah, that would be great. That would.
I think so, but it should be in the ordinance, in my opinion. So we should basically say that there'll be some determination, not just a tier. Risk determination. So my next thing is on how, so the fact that the standard is not included into the ordinance. It's basically left to the general manager decision or whatever representative he chooses to. For example, I have a problem with the current standard. So I actually send an email to ask about what would be the free area required to be consistent, the free area of the vent. So typically a vent is characterized by how much air can get in and out. So in the current standard for the propane meter, there is 2 very expensive awning that are recommended, but we don't say what is a required venting that we want, that we need for these meters. And I think that's a problem because people may actually, at some point, this model would not be available anymore, or else we need to basically be technically based, not brand based. And we should basically have a vent that is a requirement that is basically explicit on what venting free area do the district require. So here, it's typically a simple change, I think, that we can do to the standard, but and what makes me uneasy is basically the general manager can decide whatever he wants. And currently you have a civil engineer, so I'm hopeful that he would take the right decision. But I think the specificity of the standard should be either included on it, or I don't like the way it is set up now.
We don't include our standards in any ordinance for any utility. That's not appropriate because things continually change, building codes. Like you said, models are available, and it does say or equivalent on the vent, so there is ability to get an equivalent.
Yeah, but you don't say what
look at the model number and look at it and come up with an equivalent or propose.
This is something that
and that's allowed for the ordinance to propose an alternative, to propose a different, changes. That's allowed for, but again, ordinances don't have the specificity of standards in them.
Okay, Peter. Why don't you and Eric talk about whether or not the standard should be reviewed for some of this detail or not? It'd be something the operations committee would look at.
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah, just talk to Eric about it and just see. Whether the detail about free area versus a size of event.
Right.
Whether that's necessary.
I think you need to keep it. If you make it too specific, you're going to really limit yourself.
Yeah.
I think any improvement that we can make is an improvement from where we are now. The committee reviewed this ordinance and recommended adopting it, basically. 2 months ago, wasn't it?
It was just last month, but it's more to the standard. At some point, what Bertrand's point is this, it's not the ordinance, it's the standard.
Yes. So, quite frankly, all the standards are on, Brandy and I's agenda to be bringing to operations.
That's great. Okay.
Because that's a lot of them are old and haven't been updated since before I got here. So those are things we're working on, and that would include the propane shed.
Okay, great. I just note that in section 4B, it does say the property owner the district shall inform the property owner in writing about the inspection result. I interpret that to mean the specifics of the inspection result, not just that they're in a tier X, Y, or Z. So I assume that means that there will be some information that the owner will have as to why they are in that tier. Other board members' comments?
Well, I just wanted to compliment on the quality of what's been done so far. It's a major step from where we started with, which is Peter's point, and I'm very happy with it as is, and I trust the staff to figure out how to implement it in a way that's going to be helpful for the customers, but also make it clear that there's a safety risk that we want to address. The question I had was on the curb stops. We are requiring the customers to put one in if they don't have one, as I read that.
If they don't build it to our standard, then yes, that would be required.
Okay. And I was just wondering, do we currently know the inventory of, I know a lot of them were covered by snow the last time we tried to do this. Do we know how many curb stops we're missing?
I don't have a good count off the top of my head, but that is something that in the inspection, we will be noting whether there is a curb stop existing and whether we consider it to be adequate because it's in an area where snow is removed.
Yeah, because I think for me, one of the big safety things is if something starts, being able to shut off at the street level, knowing where they all are and shutting it off. Otherwise, Drew risked his life to dig in there next to an explosive situation because we didn't know if there was a curb stop or we just didn't know where it was. So I just think that's a really important point in this ordinance.
Eric, can you clarify something you just said? You just said that the curb stop would be required to put in if they don't have a satisfactory protection of the meter. Is that what this says? I didn't read that.
Yeah, so let's read what I have up on the screen. So here they have a choice. Under A for tier 2, they can do 1 or 2. And in 2, it includes the curb stop. In tier 3, it includes 1 or 2, and 2 includes the curb stop. In tier 4, similarly, so they can do 1 or 2. So they have a choice. They can build it per our standard, or they can do all these things. And in all these things includes a curb stop.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting.
So
Okay.
it's
Somehow
nestled in there, but yes, it's in there.
somehow I missed the or.
Yeah.
I did also.
But should it be a whore, actually? I mean, I agree with Bob. Curb stop are critical for safety of the staff. So are we comfortable that some, even with the protection, don't have curb stop? And what should we do about that?
One thought on that, Bertrand, that I had, I have actually been thinking about exactly that, because, and I know that the district we've been considering having a project that installs curb stops where there are none. But an approach, so the analogy is what many counties and municipalities require today with regard to carbon monoxide detectors. And that is that if there's ever some work done on a property that requires a building permit, and they don't have something, in this case, a curb stop, that's part of their permit, they've got to install the curb stop. So that's one way of getting at it. It wouldn't necessarily cover everything. The other way is to create a project to do it.
Yeah. So my question also on that is, a curb stop is typically far away from the meter. I mean, and so basically in the section that is under the purview of the district. So basically, what the process? I mean, the homeowner is hiring a contractor to install a curb stop, and is there an inspection that happening after that by the PUD?
Yeah. So to answer that, we would work with the customers in that situation. They just like we do with any time a customer touches any of our other utilities. If they'd like to hire a contractor to do it, they can do it under our inspection, or if we have staff and availability, we can do that.
Do you have a cost estimate of a typical curb stop installation? What would that be?
No, I don't, because it's so variable. I mean, if someone's putting in their driveway versus, like yours is up and away, for example, but if it was in your driveway, it'd be closer. If you didn't have one, we had to do it.
Actually, I have two. One in my driveway, one on the street. So, but yeah,
it's variable. I can't give you an answer on the typical cost. No.
Well, it's clearly something we need to improve, because this is a serious liability risk and everything. So I don't know if it should be a whore. I think we should have a program to have curb stop for everyone. The same way I think we should know each electrical meter capacity and connection.
We did have a project proposed by staff for the last 2 years. It's just been pushed below the line.
Yeah.
To do this.
So I just want to be sure I understand the requirement here. So the one was be within 5 months following the date of notification, then install the proper meter enclosure or structure, or do 2A, B, and C, which is within 5 months sign an indemnity agreement, within 18 months, if it's propane, put in the curb stop, and then, but within 12 months, you still provide the protection.
The timeline's very, Eric, you're only reading one.
So. Well, yeah, I know, okay. But it's similar for the others too. But
there's
my point is,
for tier 2, I just want to be, in case someone misinterpreted, there is no C for tier 2. Just to be clear for everyone.
Okay.
But yes, for like tier 3, there is and tier 4, there is an ABC. That is correct.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that if they delay, they still have to get a protection in. And after they have the protection in, they still have to put the stop in if they delay beyond the initial 5 months.
Yes.
Am I reading that correctly?
I would, Yeah, within 5 months. They have 5 months to do those things. That is correct. To do one or the other, which includes A, B, C, and under 2, 2A, 2B, 2C, but those have rolling timelines of those.
I still think curb stop should be required for everyone. 2, 3, and 4. Actually, even 1 or 0. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how, in a legal sense, you can cause somebody just to put one in. I mean,
So that's why I was asking about the cost. What it takes? How many do we miss, and what it would take to basically fix that? Because I think it's
what I budgeted. If you look back at the prior budgets, the item that was disapproved by the board, I think it was 600,000 over 2 years. Brandy and Rick.
How much you said?
600,000 over 2 years is my recollection, but I might be misremembering.
So how many are there?
That was every single one. That was redoing the lines as well. It wasn't just
okay.
Curb stop plus the lines. I see nodding of heads, so I think they agree with me that I was right on that guess on my number. And Eric, your point's very well taken. And we do that, by the way, when people apply for building permits to, add a garage or do something different, and they have to pull a building permit. If there's things that need to be corrected to bring it up to current standard, we generally require those as a condition of our approval of or our sign off on those permits. So you're absolutely right. That should be a protocol, standard protocol, and it is our protocol. So we are doing that.
It probably doesn't address very many lots, right?
No, I think, and Brandy will hop in here. I think we're at 9, and 8 of those are one condominium, multifamily sort of subdivision. Is that right, Brandy?
It's 11 and 1,
11.
but yes, the 10 are in one subdivision or condo.
And do we know how many homes don't have curb stops?
We started counting them last year. I think the number that we've been using is that we think about a third have curb stops that are accessible in an area, or maybe it's 25% that are inaccessible in an area that we, based on our last that's our last estimate. But we still, as Bob said, we started to do it, and then snow came and we couldn't finish it. And we have some. We have a pretty good system in our report server that identifies all utility points, meters, curb stops, clean outs, et cetera.
I just looked up the count. We have 124 propane stops at GPS.
But I believe that those do not. I believe those do not include curb stops that are on the property itself.
That's probably correct. Yeah.
Like just in a driveway.
It's the ones that we were able to identify.
Yeah, I think it does.
Regardless of where they are, those are the ones that we have marked.
Oh, okay.
And I didn't break that down by individual units versus condos.
Well, so overall, I mean, first of all, the protection parts, the tier parts, I'm in full agreement with. No problems. The curb stops, we absolutely need curb stops somehow, some way. And I guess I'm just going to rely on Dick Shanahan and his review that it's first of all, it's okay to require a curb stop even if what's being done doesn't require a permit, which is the case of, say, a modest change to the meter, the shelter. That's number one. Number two, that it's okay to require someone to put in a valve or a curb stop into something that we own, because now we're saying we own it. And number three, it's okay that we say we own it.
Yes, to all of the above.
And with regard to the third one, I just want to confirm my understanding. My understanding is that prior to our purchase and sale agreement of the electric system, gas system and electric system, Mountain Utilities explicitly owned those lines.
Technically, they still do.
That's what I was asking. Yeah. But there is no Mountain Utilities.
Correct. And based on that recent litigation we had, and Dick concurs, this is the other component of this ordinance is we're taking ownership in those cases where it's appropriate for the single family residences.
And Dick is confident that there's nothing, no process that we should go through to basically say we own it.
Correct. He said this ordinance is sufficient.
Okay, I'll just say it sounds weird to me, but okay. That's what he says. Okay, any other comments or discussion on this proposed ordinance? Anything from the public? Do we have a public anymore? There's On, there's Terry. Seeing none, I'm going back up to find the number of the ordinance. Do I have a motion to adopt ordinance number 21-01 concerning propane?
Dorberg, so moved.
Okay, Peter moves. Is there a second to that motion?
This is Bob. I second it.
Bob seconds it. Okay, Peter, roll call.
Rickert,
Aye.
Epstein,
Aye.
Schroeder,
Aye.
Perot,
I'm going to vote no because I don't think my concern has been fully addressed. So I think it's a walk in the right direction, but I don't think it's ready for my yes vote. No.
Dornberg, aye. So 4-1.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we now go on to item 9H, wastewater treatment plan improvement project. This is a notice for district's intent to file notice of exemption and other associated environmental documents necessary in association with the project. Eric.
So we've had some good meetings with USDA on the wastewater treatment plant project. They've accepted the preliminary engineering report with some corrections. Our engineers made the corrections from his end. One of the corrections that we had to make was how we calculate an EDU. In order to apply for funding from them, we have to use their EDU methodology. So our rate consultant, Mark Hildebrand, went back and calculated per their requirements. And that has likewise been submitted to USDA. The third component is that they require the environmental document to be completed before they consider the application, before they send it back to DC. So this is the environmental document for the wastewater treatment plant. As you know, it's almost entirely replacement, refurbishment of our existing equipment. There is zero expansion of capacity. As a result, we fall under categorical exemption 15301 Part C. And I would ask that the board adopt the notice of exemption.
Okay, any questions or discussion?
Can you just clarify, we had to calculate EDUs differently? Does that mean we have to change our rates? Or
No, they will do their analysis of our rate structure based on the revised EDU calculation we provided.
okay.
But they'll do all that work. We asked if we needed to do that for them, and they felt bad enough that we had to redo our EDUs. So they said no, they would take care of that. They just appreciated that we were able to give it in their format.
Any other discussion? If not, is there a motion to, what do we say, adopt or approve, Eric? The notice of
I would, that the board adopt the notice of exemption, I think is probably the right verbiage.
The board adopts the notice of exemption as described in Appendix E in our packet.
So moved. Dornbrook.
Peter moves. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
John Schroeder seconds. Peter, roll call.
Rickert,
Aye.
Epstein,
Aye.
Schroeder,
Aye.
Perot,
Aye.
Dornberg, aye. It's unanimous.
Great, thank you. Let's move on to item 9I, which is the Economic Development Committee, and this is, I guess, my item.
Do you think we could take a short break?
Oh, sure. Let's take a Well, let's take a break until 10:40.
Okay? Awesome.
With Bruce Gianola is moving out of the valley, and he sort of became the leader of the effort for the economic development. The question is first of all, does the district, this was something that actually Bob Epstein and the district initiated some years ago. And it's evolved in a way. And then over time, Bruce sort of took up the leadership of the group, but he's gone. And so the question is, what is our role in economic development with the group, number one? And secondly, what should the group be? Should it be essentially a communication and coordination effort a couple times a year, which I think is the way it began? Is it a group that actually should undertake initiatives and try to spearhead specific initiatives as a group? So those are really the questions I wanted to ask. And just one suggestion of what I know is that from a communication I had with Matt Jones, that KCA board is quite interested in this, and perhaps they could more officially take on the leadership and coordination role for the group, and so on. But I'm curious to know, I mean, particularly Bertrand, who's our liaison to the group, and Terry, I know you've been involved with the group. I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are for the value and the role, and the ongoing nature of this group, and what the district should be contributing to it, if you have thoughts.
Yeah, so I do think, yes, this is an important endeavor for the sake of the community, but also for the sake of the district. So definitively, we should be part of it. If KCA wants to take the leadership on that, I don't have any objections to that. I think that's fair and reasonable, but I do think the district should be involved. Yeah.
And what do you think the group should be? What should it be? Should it be a group that leads specific initiatives? Is it a group that simply gets together and communicates with each other and coordinates around things like road closures and I'm not sure what other kinds of things. Terry, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I unmuted myself. No, I think this definitely has a tremendous value to the district. And we kind of lost our way. We weren't meeting anymore. And I think it's valuable to have those coordinating meetings with the various stakeholders, as to what's going on. Maybe semi-annually. It helps everybody to understand. And then just FYI, the Alpine County Board of Supervisors did approve moving ahead to hire a economic development director. We haven't received the job description yet. Hopefully that'll happen in early March. I'm hoping maybe the first meeting in March, and then we can move ahead with for that search, which would be beneficial too, I would think, because we haven't had an economic development director in Alpine County ever. So that would be a good move. And then coordinating with the economic development that Amador County has, they also have a part-time director, but working with them, I think that would be very helpful.
Okay. Bob, do you have any thoughts? You're the initial brains behind this idea.
Well, I mean, it's sort of figuring out what's realistic and how to get the best value out of people's time. That's what I'm not sure of, because I haven't been involved for a couple of years. But the two observations I have, one is that since there's no staff assigned to this to help coordinate the follow-up, we'll come up with some good ideas at meetings, and then they don't really happen because everybody is getting paid to work on their regular jobs. So the absence of staff to do follow-up is one of the dilemmas. Mm-hmm. And then the second is Vail isn't that open to discussing issues and plans. And so that's historically been a limitation. I don't know if the new management has changed that, but the management I dealt with wasn't that helpful in sort of talking about what's needed and how to do it.
Eric, do you have any thoughts from you've participated in the meetings, I know.
No, I think what everybody said so far is pretty much, sums up where we are, where we're at. I will say that I thought the communication we had with Tom as mountain manager, which I think was after you went off the committee, Bob, I thought was very good.
Yeah.
We haven't really had a meeting. Well, no, we haven't had a meeting. And I don't know about the subcommittee meetings. I know Standish and Bertrand are on 2 subcommittees that I was not involved with.
Yeah.
But I don't know about how Matt's been. I can't speak to that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if it's okay with everybody, I will communicate with, since I was in an email conversation with Matt about this, I'll communicate with him. Well, and maybe, is it his name Dolan, Eric,
That's correct. Dolan Beckel is the new president. He's in Palisades.
of KCA president, right?
Correct.
Well, I'll try to initiate a conversation with him just to see if he and KCA would be willing to sort of take the leadership role that Bruce had taken up, and to suggest that at minimum, the district thinks that a semi-annual gathering for at least communicating what each other is doing, their concerns and so on, at minimum, do that. And if there are initiatives that can be followed up upon that probably require staff, that can be discussed at the group. But so if that's okay with everybody, that's what I'll do. And at this point, Bertrand is our liaison to the group.
Yeah, so maybe actually, since like Eric, I was not invited to the last few meetings, so I think that should be changed because
yeah, I'm not sure that the subcommittee
yeah,
structure was working as Bruce had envisioned.
Yeah, and so it should be dissolved. And actually, Standish probably was invited at the last meeting. I don't know if he went, but so anyway, should be one representative for KMPUD for sure, and Standish is no longer there.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, I'll report back on what I find out from Dolan and Matt. Okay. Thanks. Now we move on to item 10, General Manager's Report.
Well, this meeting's gone on long enough, so I'll keep it short and sweet. I attended multiple Aqua and CMUA subcommittee meetings. As you know, I'm on the Aqua 3 region board. We had a board meeting. I'm on the energy committee meeting for Aqua, and I attended that meeting as well. I'm also on the ad hoc committee for the new CARB rules for Aqua, and I just was appointed to the CMUA one as well. So there's a little redundancy there, but it's good to make sure they're both on the same page. Comments were submitted on the new CARB rules for fleets on behalf of Aqua and CMUA and the committee. We met with CARB staff on that issue as well. Additionally, myself and Jeff, and I'm going to get his name wrong, Terry Gavea. All right, good. And Dane Wadley from CSDA. We met with State Senator Dahl's staff to talk about our concerns and our issues. We went over quite a few things, including inverse condemnation, the new CARB rules, and the new issues coming out from the conflict between CPUC and CALISO and how that affects us as well. So covered quite a bit of ground, a lot of meetings.
Eric, when you say the new CARB rules, is that the fleet, the electric?
That's the new fleet rules. Yeah, I think I said that to you, right, Bob?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The new fleet rules. Okay. That's all I have.
Okay. Any questions of Eric? If not, we'll go on to the operations report. Rick?
Good morning, everyone. I really don't have too much to add as well, but open for any questions from the board.
Yeah, Rick, I can't remember if it was the last board meeting or if it was at the operations committee meeting. You gave a number of how many calls the fire department had experienced over the last year. What was that number?
I think it was 96.
That's what I think it was too. And the reason I bring it up is I was surprised when I heard it, because typically annually, don't we get in the hundreds? I mean, like 125 to 150?
Yes. It goes from 125 to actually 145, I think, the year before.
And we've had more people in the valley. I mean, That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's,
But there was less traffic on 88, which is the bulk of our calls. The accidents on 88, right, Rick? We've had way less calls out on Highway 88 because people weren't traveling as much in the first part of COVID.
Campgrounds, restaurants, everything being closed. Even though more people here in Kirkwood, there's just less people
see.
traveling.
well,
I
that's
agree with that.
interesting. No, that's very interesting. Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Any questions from Bertrand?
Yes, it's related to fire hydrants. I've been approached by several KMA homeowners, and basically the PUD started enforcing basically this 15 feet clearance around fire hydrant. Unfortunately, in KMA, several of them are in the middle of parking pad, basically nullifying this parking pad. But the question I have is specific to what's done this year, which is different from previous year. And so first, it looked like the district has added specific pole indicating the clearance they wanted to respect, and that's how they deploy it now. My question is, it looks to me, I have not measured, but that some of them exceed 15 feet. And so I'm asking is, and KMA told me they'd be happy to actually have a discussion with how to solve these various issues with the PUD. And so so that's one thing I want to pass on, and I recommend that Rick get in touch with KMA to address this issue specifically. But I also had a comment from a resident that basically one of the employees was fairly aggressive, basically, when she asked about it, and basically telling her that you guys bring that to yourself. And so I'm not sure, I certainly don't think this is proper communication from staff to resident. And so I'm not sure what actually that person was meaning at all. So I just want to report that to the operation manager.
You'll need to give us a little more detail about who that person was and who are.
I can happily do that now or later.
Yeah, it probably is not appropriate at a public meeting. You
Mhm.
don't talk about personnel issues. You've kind of already violated the law with what you just said, unfortunately. So send an email to Rick and myself, and we'll look into the issue.
Okay.
I'm just going to intercede here with something I was going to say during the operations committee, but since you've brought it up, Bertrand. So I have been in conversation with one or two people in KMA specifically about snow removal from parking pads. And I think the same conversation could probably be had with people in certain of the condo complexes like Thimblewood. And so I've mentioned this to Eric, and Peter and I have talked about it. What I want to do over the next several weeks is contact, and I'm glad to know that people from KMA would like to talk about the hydrant issue, but I'd like to expand that a little bit and just see. Here's my impression after I have some conversations is that with expanded or increased occupancy of homes, more cars, probably that means, as well as new people who don't necessarily understand the importance of rules associated with moving cars around, that there may be a couple of problems that have to be addressed that maybe previously didn't have to be addressed. So I'd like to talk to a couple of people, someone on the governing board, for example, of KMA, maybe a couple of other people, just to understand to see if these are true problems that are in general across the HOA, and again, possibly in places like Thimblewood or otherwise. And with that information, Peter and I'd like to sit down with Rick and probably Dave Waddle and just talk about those things and see if the problems exist, where the solutions lie. Is the solution lie with the various associations in terms of their communications with homeowners? Does the solution lie in tweaking some of the logistics of our snow removal, or what? And then talk to the operations committee about that. So it's just something that Peter and I are just going to undertake and try to see, A, define a problem if it exists, and B, see if there's something that we can do about it or the associations can do about it. Okay? Just want to let you know that. Okay, Rick, anything else?
No, sir.
No, okay. Okay, standing committee reports. Why don't we start with planning?
Okay, planning. We met yesterday. Give me 1 second here. Ba-ba-bum. Here we go. So we first had recommendation for our new member, and we are delighted to have this new skilled people with us, and hopefully they will have an impact on our committee. There was one discussion we had about the legal requirement that the district has, and so we want to make sure that we are meeting our obligation. So related to our the level of green energy that we are using and providing, but also come up with a subject of the SP 1037, which should apply to us as we are publicly owned utilities, and which we actually are not providing. So there'll be more. So the last meeting yesterday was actually, since we had 2 new members, there was a lot of topics which were not actually discussed at length. It was just trying to discuss what's coming. And some of us took actually ownership of some of the items to dig in, research, and report back at the next meeting. So I'm not going to go further in detail. I'm just going to tell you the various topics that have been that will be actually approached by the committee in the coming months. So the legal requirement that we have for carbon footprint and energy efficiency, fossil fuel shifting. What can we do to help to basically shift from propane to electricity, and that bring back that to the electrical rate that we had a discussion earlier, but also diesel consumption at the power plant with the storage opportunities. And I understand also there is some issue on the vehicles that the PUD use that could become electric over time as well. So this is all, how can we shift from dirty energy to clean energy? Energy efficiency initiative is another one. We mentioned talk a lot about today about electric red gold. I'm very happy that actually Bob reshuffled this full project to actually try to see what to really try to achieve beside financial stability. And so that was really a good surprise that I saw that coming today in the packet. And that basically it. We talk a little bit about the goals for the general manager of fire rating insurance, which indeed are not requiring our general manager to improve our rating by himself, by buying, for example, like he proposed yesterday, a ladder. And also how to basically monitor the change that the pandemic has in our community on the usage that's happening in the valley compared to the previous years. We did not talk about OGAS because we ran out of time, and that's it. So that's basically my report.
Okay, thank you. I may make a suggestion that these topics, which are obviously quite important, that in your conversations over the next couple of months, be aimed at formulating goals for the next year or 2 years or 3 years.
Multiple years,
yes. So that they're articulated as goals so we can all discuss them and then buy into them. Thank you, Bertrand. Finance, Bob?
Well, we covered everything that we covered at the last finance meeting. We're back up to full strength in terms of committee members with the Vail representative as well. So I think we've covered everything so far. And obviously we know what we have to work on next.
Great. Operations, Peter?
I think we've gone over most of the issues, unless you can think of something that you'd like to bring up.
No, we have gone over those issues. The meter
And our next
protection.
meeting is in 2 weeks.
Great. Communications, Bob again.
The next focus that we have, which we'll meet on Monday, is the redesign of the KMPUD website.
Oh, great.
So we've been collecting ideas for it, but we didn't really want to try to implement it in the middle of everything else going on. So we will start to prototype on Monday and then choose a target date to start to finish the implementation.
Great. Personnel has not met, but we are going to meet this month, and I'm going to, orient John to personnel structure and issues and organization, et cetera, at that meeting. Okay.
There's a small hazing ceremony, John. Well, you'll have to
Small
go.
hazing, yeah, we've got to do a personnel hazing. Yeah.
It's not as painful as it used to be, though, is what I heard.
Really?
That might be true.
Sounds wonderful.
Okay, temporary advisory committee reports. OGALS, Peter.
OGALS. Okay, OGALS stands for Office of Grants and Local Services.
Yay, good for you.
All right.
That's why we call it OGALS.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've had our first 2 meetings in the last month, and basically we're looking for applications for the $185 million that Proposition 68 authorized to be spent on recreational improvements. There's a $200,000 minimum per year for that each